Welcome back to another chilling episode of Horror Story. Got a terrifying tale of your own? Send it in for a chance to be featured in our next episode, and the best story of the week wins an Amazon gift card. So, hit the subscribe button, smash like, and share your most spine-tingling horror experience with us. Let's begin the stories. I never thought I'd end up spending a summer chasing internet clout. But after sophomore year chewed through my savings like a paper shredder and rent hiked up another $100 a month, I was desperate. I needed cash, fast. My job at the campus library wasn't cutting it anymore, and no one was hiring for anything that paid more than gas money. So, when a roommate forwarded me a thread titled Red Room Challenge, Get Paid to Watch, I didn't laugh it off like I probably should have. I clicked, I read, and I let curiosity push me past the point of common sense. It was posted on a fringe subreddit called r Digital Hounds, one of those places filled with ARG nerds and creepypasta hunters who act like every cryptic GIF is some CIA cover-up. The post was simple, almost aggressively so. No flair, no image. Just a short paragraph. We're running a private stream. You won't be on camera. You won't be asked to do anything illegal. You will watch 1 hour, unlisted, paid via crypto upon exit. Join the thread. You'll know if you're chosen. The comments were locked, and the op had a burner account with no post history. Total red flag, obviously. But my gut told me it was more than just a LARP. The post didn't try to sell itself. It didn't try to be scary. And that made it worse. I don't know what possessed me, but I replied to the post via DM. I just wrote, I'll watch. That's all. I didn't expect anything to come of it. I assumed it was bait, maybe phishing, maybe just someone screwing around. But 2 days later, I got a response. A blank message with a link. Not a URL. Not even a proper site. It was an Onion address. And a 16-character password with a countdown timer beneath it. 3 days, 4 hours, 21 minutes. No instructions, no description. Just the message. Be alone, be still, be silent. We are recording. I didn't tell anyone. Not my roommate, not my Discord group, not even my cousin who usually gets all my worst ideas first. It wasn't because I wanted to protect them. It was because I already felt like I'd stepped into something I couldn't explain. Saying it out loud would have made it real. And if it was real, I wasn't ready for what that meant. But I still planned around it, cleared my schedule, faked a reason to miss work, bought blackout curtains for my room, just in case. I knew it was stupid. But something about that countdown made it feel inevitable, like the stream was coming whether I logged in or not. The day the timer hit 0, I locked myself in my room, turned off my phone, and booted up an old burner laptop I hadn't touched. Since high school, I used a VPN, loaded Tor, entered the link. The page was blank for a few seconds. Then, text appeared. Welcome, observer number 104. Do not speak. Do not react. Do not exit early. We see you. A red circle pulsed in the center of the screen like a heartbeat. I hovered my mouse, hesitated, and clicked. The stream began. It wasn't what I expected. There was no horror movie glitch effect, no screams, no flickering basement light bulb. It was just a room, square, small, empty. The walls were painted a deep red, so red it almost looked fake, like it had been digitally saturated. The only thing in the room was a chair, plain, wooden, centered perfectly in the middle of the frame. No people, no music, no jump scares, just that room. For the first 10 minutes, I honestly thought it might be a prank or a performance art stunt. But then the timestamp at the bottom of the screen changed from 0 hours 10 minutes and 0 seconds to 0 hours 9 minutes and 59 seconds and started counting down. That's when I realized it wasn't showing the time elapsed. It was showing the time left. Every second that passed, the stream got darker. Not in brightness, but in tone. The shadows stretched further into the corners. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, like they were breathing. At 0 hours 8 minutes and 3 seconds, the chair moved. Just a twitch, like one of its legs had slipped. But there was no sound, no visible force. It just shifted. I leaned in, trying to catch anything out of place, but the image stayed the same. Still, silent. My own breathing sounded too loud, so I held it. At 0 hours 6 minutes and 47 seconds, something flickered in the bottom left corner of the frame. Not a person, not a shape, just a blur, a presence. It was gone before I could even be sure it had been there. The screen glitched once, barely a hiccup, but when the image returned, the camera angle had changed slightly, lower, more tilted. Now it felt like I was watching from someone's point of view, as if whoever was filming had entered the room. By 0 hours 4 minutes and 22 seconds, I couldn't look away. I felt paralyzed, like taking my eyes off the screen would somehow break a rule I hadn't meant to agree to. The walls seemed to move when I blinked. The red bled into the shadows until everything looked soaked in it. The timer ticked down. 0 hours 3 minutes and 10 seconds, then 0 hours 2 minutes and 58 seconds. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the far corner, facing the wall. No sound, no movement. Just standing. The stream didn't mention a person. The rules didn't mention a person. I leaned forward. The resolution wasn't great, but the figure was unmistakably facing the corner, like it had been there the whole time and I just hadn't noticed. Or maybe I wasn't supposed to see it until now. The timer read 0 hours 1 minute and 34 seconds. The figure moved, not toward the camera, just slightly, like it had heard something outside the room. Then its head turned, slow and wrong, too far to the side to be human. And it looked at me. When the stream cut off, the screen didn't go black. It went white, just blank, silent white, like I'd been dumped out of something too big to comprehend. Then came the text, one line in small red font that pulsed once before disappearing. Payment processed. Return when called. That was it. No link, no confirmation. Just those words and a sudden return to the Tor homepage. My laptop whirred like it had been overclocked the entire time, the fan groaning as if it had just survived a furnace. I closed it, my fingers trembling, and leaned back in my chair. My room was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural, like all the noise has been sucked out and what's left is a thin static you can feel in your teeth. I looked around, checking my closet, my windows, every corner. Not for anything in particular, just needing to reassure myself the world still made sense. I'd only been watching a live stream, but my pulse was racing like I'd just outrun something physical. Something close. I told myself it was over. That it had just been an underground art piece or a weird arga with good production. I even opened my crypto wallet out of habit, not expecting anything. But there it was, $750 in a fresh transaction. Real. Verified. My jaw clenched. I should have been thrilled. That kind of money meant groceries, rent, breathing room. But all I felt was dread. The kind that curls up behind your ribs and waits. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to see what would come into my dreams if I did. The next day, I tried to ignore it. Went to class, drank bad coffee, acted like I wasn't constantly checking shadows to make sure they hadn't gotten longer. But the silence followed me. Like the sound around me was always just a beat too slow to catch up. Then the second message arrived, not on Reddit, not in email. It came through Google Docs, a shared file titled thread.rrm. My cursor blinked in real time, then text appeared. You saw it. You were seen. Invite 2. Come back before the 7th. 3 seats. 1. Room. Observe or disappear. I stared at the screen for almost an hour. The words burned into my brain. It didn't explain anything. Didn't even ask. Just told. It was as if agreeing to the first session had already signed me up for more, like I was part of a game that didn't care if I knew the rules. And the part that scared me most was how curious I still was. I should have deleted the file, thrown out the laptop, called someone. But I didn't. I opened Discord and typed 2 names, Mark and Liv. They were the only 2 I trusted with this kind of thing. Mark was a computer science major who ran a hobbyist channel decoding strange online puzzles. Liv was deep into the digital occult side of Reddit. She'd been kicked out of 3 subreddits for sharing stuff too real. We'd all gone to high school together, then drifted back into contact through mutual weirdness. When I told them I had a stream that couldn't be traced, that paid out legit crypto, and had something on it I couldn't explain, they were hooked instantly. We met at Mark's place that weekend, neutral ground. He had a 2nd floor apartment, with blackout curtains and a mess of monitors that looked like he was training to be a Bond villain. I showed them the .onion address, the countdown timer, the doc. Liv read it 3 times without speaking. Then she said something I still haven't forgotten. This isn't new. I've heard of these before. Red rooms that don't exist on the surface, not murder sites like the rumors. Not gore. Witness rituals. Memory locks. They use watchers as keys. I asked her what that meant. She didn't. Answer. Mark was already setting up an isolated system on a junk laptop he'd prepped for deep net testing. He was excited. Too excited. If this is real, he said, we'll record everything. Split audio, screen capture, maybe even heat. Signature analysis if I can hook the Fleur in time. We'll see how deep the rabbit hole goes. I didn't say what I was thinking, that the rabbit wasn't in the hole anymore. It had come out, sat down, looked right at me. We made a plan. We'd all log in from the same room, each on a different device but on the same connection. We'd record locally and offload to separate encrypted drives immediately after. We'd set timers, stay connected with push-to-talk mics only, and promise not to speak no matter what we saw. It sounded smart, precise, like we had control. But deep down, I think we all knew we were just building paper armor. When the new countdown hit 0, we were ready, or so we told ourselves. 3 seats, 1 room, and something waiting to be watched. We met at Mark's place again the day the 2nd stream was set to go live. It was a hot, slow Sunday, the kind where the air feels sticky even with the AC on, and every second of waiting starts to drag. We'd blacked out the windows, silenced all notifications, and set up 3 laptops in a triangle around Mark's big desk, each isolated from the others, no shared drives or syncs. Mark was proud of the setup. He'd even built a Faraday cage around the router, just in case we were dealing with some kind of signal-based surveillance. Liv brought salt and candles, because of course she did. This isn't just code, she said under her breath. It's a door. At exactly 7 p.m., the link went live. We each logged in separately, entering our access codes and agreeing silently not to speak unless it was absolutely necessary. The site was slightly different this time. Same red background, same single button marked Observe, but the text above it now read, 3 keys. 1 door, eyes open. When we clicked, the stream didn't start right away. Instead, the screen showed a brief flicker white static, then black, and then resolved into the room again. But this time, the chair wasn't empty. A person sat there. They were wearing what looked like a burlap sack over their head. The rough fabric stained dark around the mouth, and eyes like it had soaked up something. Their hands were tied behind their back, bare feet flat on the floor. At first, none of us moved. Not because we were scared, though we were, but because the sheer stillness of the scene was hypnotic. The camera didn't wobble. The figure didn't shift. It felt like a photograph, except for the faint sound of breathing coming through the speakers, dry, ragged, barely human. The timer was back too. 60 minutes, counting down. Nothing else. No messages. No explanation. We waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The figure never moved. Not an inch, but something else changed. The walls. They began to darken. Not just in color, but in shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of the lighting. But then Mark said, through the push-to-talk mic, "Look at the corners." We all leaned closer. Each corner of the room now had a shadow that wasn't there before, not regular darkness. These were shapes, tall, thin, like people standing just outside the visible frame. They didn't move either. But the longer we stared, the harder it became to look away. Then the sound began to shift. It wasn't breathing anymore. It was whispering, low, layered, like 3 or 4 voices speaking at once but saying different things. Liv grabbed a notepad and started scribbling. "I recognize some of this," she said softly. Enochian syllables, the kind used in ceremonial invocation. I wanted to ask what that meant, but I knew we weren't supposed to break focus. So we just kept watching. At 0 hours 39 minutes and 12 seconds, the timer stuttered, froze for half a second, then jumped back 5 minutes. Just like that, we were stuck again at 44 to 12, and the figure in the chair started shaking. Not violently, not like a seizure, just a slow, rhythmic twitching. Shoulders, head, then feet. As if they were starting to wake up from a dream they didn't want to be in. The whispers grew louder. One of the shadows stepped forward. It only moved a few inches, but it was movement, deliberate. And in that moment, every hair on my body stood on end. I wasn't scared because it was unnatural. I was scared because it looked completely natural. Like gravity had shifted for it alone, and the rules didn't apply anymore. Mark cursed under his breath and reached for the kill switch on his laptop, the one he'd rigged to shut down the connection instantly. But before he could press it, his screen went black. Not off, just black. Hours stayed on. Then came the whisper. This time out loud, not through the stream. Not from a speaker. From behind us. A single word, "Stay." We froze. None of us turned around. The room went cold in seconds, and Liv's candle blew out without warning. The flame didn't flicker or faded, just vanished. Mark's laptop rebooted on its own and reconnected to the stream. The timer now read 0 hours 22 minutes and 5 seconds. The figure in the chair had slumped over, limp, but their chest was still rising, still breathing. But now, the chair was empty on my screen. Only Mark still showed the figure. Liv showed something else entirely, a different room, one without walls. Just an endless red floor stretching out into darkness with dozens of chairs scattered across it. Most were empty. A few had shadows hunched over them. No sound, just the timer ticking down. We didn't speak. We couldn't. Something about breaking the silence now felt wrong. Like we'd be heard by something that was still deciding what. We were at 0 hours 1 minute and 13 seconds. The feed glitched again. This time, all our screens synced to one image. The room again. All 3 of us were in the frame, sitting in the chairs, tied up, sacks over our heads. The timer hit 0. The stream cut out, and we were back, just sitting in the room. At the desk, drenched in sweat, screens blank. No message this time. Just silence. The rest of the night passed in a strange fog. We didn't say goodbye. No debrief. Just gathered our things and left Mark's place like we were exiting a funeral no one wanted to admit they'd attended. The air outside felt wrong, too still, too quiet. The kind of quiet that clings to your skin long after the wind stops blowing. I didn't go straight home. I walked for blocks aimlessly, hoping the rhythm of moving might shake something loose in my brain. But all it did was make the memory stronger. I kept seeing the stream image flash behind my eyes, us in those chairs, bound and silent, like the camera had peeled back a layer of reality and shown us what was really there underneath. I didn't sleep, again. Not because of nightmares this time, but because my laptop turned itself on at 3:12 a.m. I hadn't touched it. Hadn't even plugged it in. But the screen lit up, the fans kicked on, and there was a new file sitting on the desktop named room3_feed.mov. It hadn't been there before. I checked the metadata created at 3:11 a.m., 1 minute before the machine turned on. I didn't open it. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something told me not to. Instead, I unplugged the machine, yanked the battery, and shoved it in the back of my closet under a pile of blankets. It still glowed faintly under the layers, like the screen refused to die. The next day, I met up with Liv at a coffee shop halfway between our places. She looked worse than I did, hollow-eyed, skin pale, one sleeve of her hoodie stretched like she'd been pulling on it all night. She didn't order anything, just sat down and said, "It followed me." I asked what she meant. She pulled a small velvet pouch out of her bag and dumped its contents onto the table. A USB drive, burned black around the edges. "This was in my mailbox this morning," she said. "No return address. No note. I don't even use this address on anything." Mark was next. He called us that evening, voice low and shaky, background noise distorted. "Something's wrong with the audio," he said. "I've been scrubbing the recordings we saved, and there's layers beneath the stream audio, low tones, frequencies that shouldn't be there. It's like dot, like a language, but not one we speak." I asked if he meant backward speech, hidden spectrogram patterns, anything like that. He paused. "It's not for humans," he said. "It's for machines." That's when we all started noticing the other things. Streetlights outside our windows flickering in specific patterns, 3 blinks at a time. Phone batteries draining even when turned off. Dreams that weren't dreams, waking up in strange places in our apartments, standing in front of mirrors we didn't remember walking to. The worst was the knock. Always at 3:33 a.m., always 3. Taps, always at the window, no matter what floor you lived on. I tried ignoring it. Told myself it was stress, a shared delusion, mass psychosis fueled by internet paranoia and no sleep. But then my roommate confronted me. He said he'd woken up 3 nights in a row to find me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wall. Never said a word, never blinked, just sat there for hours. I didn't remember any of it. The final straw came when Liv sent us a voice memo. She'd recorded it in the middle of the night, too scared to type. In the background, you could hear the faint sound of her breathing, and underneath that, another voice, faint, flat, repeating her name, over and over. In my voice, we were breaking apart, but the worst part? We were being pulled back in. A new thread appeared on our digital house. Not from the same burner account, but with the exact same formatting. Same font, same lack of flair. This time it said, 3 have seen, 1 remains. Final observation at 4 a.m. Red Room Prime. Entry granted upon reply. Password, witness. The replies were already locked. Our usernames were listed below the post, not our Reddit usernames. Our real names. Liv called me in tears. She didn't want to go back in. Neither did I, but she said the same thing I'd been thinking. If we don't, we're stuck like this. It'll never stop. Mark didn't even hesitate. "I'm going in," he said. "Whatever it is, we open the door. We finish it, or it finishes us. We picked a time. We set the laptops back up. This time, in a different place, lives on's cabin an hour out of town. No signals, no power grid. Just us and the dark. The forest outside was quiet, too quiet, and as we sat down, each with our screens glowing faint red, I had the strangest feeling that we weren't just going into the Red Room. We were already in it. The forest cabin was supposed to be a controlled environment. Neutral ground away from Wi-Fi interference, smart devices, and anything else that could be used against us. Liv's aunt hadn't lived there in over a year. No electricity, no cell signal, no GPS ping. Just wood, dust, and a winding dirt path. that cut deep enough into the trees to block out all signs of town. It felt like the safest we could be, but that feeling didn't last long. The moment we crossed the threshold, the air seemed thicker, like it was already being shared with something else. The cabin was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, more like the heat we brought with us. Just refused to settle into the walls. We set up by lantern light. 3 laptops, each fully charged, disconnected from networks, booted into sandboxed systems with no access to root folders. Mark was meticulous about it, muttering to himself as he ran checks and triple-checked the kill switches on each keyboard. Liv had placed a salt circle around the table and burned sage near the windows. It all felt ridiculous at first. Then the silence settled in so absolute it made even our breathing sound too loud. It felt like the cabin was holding its breath, waiting for us to start. At 3:59 a.m. The links activated. There was no countdown this time. Just a flash of red across the screen and a single line of text. Final witness unlocked. When we clicked, the feed didn't open to the red room. It opened to us. A live feed, same angle, same setup, same lantern glow showing the 3 of us sitting at the table, looking into our screens. I blinked. The figure in the stream blinked. Mark cursed under his breath. Liv stared without moving. Then we saw it, a 4th figure in the frame, standing just behind Liv's shoulder. Too tall, too still, no face. Its presence didn't trigger any sound, but the screen began to flicker with pulses of static, like it was glitching out in resistance. My laptop's fan roared to life. Mark's monitor dimmed briefly. The 4th figure remained featureless, unmoving, like it was part of the structure now. That's when the lanterns blew out, all of them, at once. Not flickering, not fading, just dead. We were swallowed by total darkness. Mark slammed his kill switch, but the screen stayed on. Lit red, casting faint shapes across his face. "It's not local," he said quietly. "This isn't being streamed, it's being projected." I could barely breathe. The air had gone icy. My fingers were tingling like I'd stuck them in dry ice. From somewhere inside the cabin, not on the screen, we heard a voice. Not a scream, not a whisper. Just a calm, quiet question. "Who's watching?" We didn't respond. COULDN single quote stay. The laptops dimmed again, and the screen shifted once more. This time, we were no longer in the feed. The room had returned, but the chair was broken, splintered like someone had been thrown through it. The red walls were cracked, and a trail of dark smears led out of frame. The timer was gone. Instead, the word "replaying" flashed at the bottom. The sound started slow, wet dragging noises. Then the breathing again, closer than before, distorted, like it was being funneled through a damaged speaker. We watched, frozen, as something crawled into frame. A figure, the same one from the previous stream. Except now, it was looking directly at us. No sack, no rope. Just its face. It was mine. Bloodied, mouth torn. One eye missing. Liv screamed and threw her laptop against the wall, where it shattered instantly. Mark lunged across the table to shut mine, but it refused to close, like something was physically holding it open. I stared at the figure on screen as it grinned, jagged teeth where lips should be, and mouthed a single word: "Stay." The screen cut to black. The lights flickered. Back on. Liv was sobbing on the floor. Mark had yanked the battery from his system and was swearing under his breath. I stared at the table. My laptop was closed now, but the top was scorched, as if someone had pressed a hot iron against it. A single image had burned into the cover. It was the red room, but this time, there were no walls. Just an open void and hundreds of chairs. After that night in the cabin, we didn't speak for almost 2 full days. I think all 3 of us were hoping that silence might undo something, like if we didn't talk about it, it would unstick from us. But it didn't. If anything, the distance made it worse. The image of my own ruined face still haunted me every time I shut my eyes, stitched into the folds of memory like it had always been there, waiting to surface. Liv sent me a single message on the third day. My bathroom mirror, fogged up by itself, same word. Stay. I wasn't even in the shower. Mark had it worse. He finally called and admitted something he hadn't told us earlier. He never actually shut off his machine during the cabin stream. His kill switch had failed. He said he left the screen running for over an hour after we thought it was over. And during that time, it showed something he couldn't explain. The red room, wide open, no timer, just rows and rows of chairs being filled one by one. The people sitting in them weren't reacting. They were just sitting, staring straight ahead. Like they were waiting for the next show, he whispered. Except I think we're the show now. That same night, we all got a message, not an email, not a file. A physical envelope taped to each of our doors. No stamp, no handwriting. Just thick, matte paper, sealed in wax with a symbol that looked like an eye inside a triangle, but with teeth instead of lashes. Inside was a printed photo. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped at exactly 3:33 a.m. It showed each of us asleep, in our beds, but the camera angle wasn't from the doorway or ceiling. It was from beside the mattress, like someone had been kneeling next to us, watching. The final item in the envelope was a flash drive. I didn't plug it in, neither did Liv. Mark, of course, did. What he found was worse than we expected. It was footage of us, from the Red Room feeds, but longer, unedited. There were angles we never saw before, audio that wasn't there during the live stream, and a voice, calm, male, familiar, speaking directly to us. You have seen. You have entered. Observation is no longer one-sided. The room is with you. You brought it back. Return or remain marked. He didn't say where or how, but we all understood. We had to go back. One more time. The last stream wasn't a link. It wasn't even digital. Liv got a knock at her window just after midnight. A person in a black hoodie handed her a burner phone and walked away. No words, no face. The phone had one contact. No outgoing call option. Just a blinking message that said, Stream 0 begins. At 4 a.m., no network required. You already belong. The next message came minutes later. Final observation. You are no longer the audience. That night, we met again, this time in my parents' old storage unit on the edge of town. Completely analog, no power. Just lanterns and extension cords from a portable generator. We didn't bring laptops. Just the burner phone, a tripod, and ourselves. Mark insisted we recorded with an old Hi-8 camcorder he found at a thrift store. Like that would somehow keep us safe if things went sideways. We weren't even sure what we were watching for anymore. The Red Room had left the screen. It was bleeding into our lives now, into reflections, into dreams, into moments when no one else was around. Every shadow looked deeper. Every mirror felt like a trap. When the stream began, it wasn't on the phone. It was on the walls. The walls of the storage unit slowly turned red. Not like paint, like light. A glow that pulsed from the concrete itself. And then came the sound low. Static heavy, like someone whispering through broken headphones. The word repeated again and again. Witness, witness, witness. Our eyes began to sting. Liv fell to her knees, clutching her head. Mark staggered backward into the corner, vomiting into a bucket we'd brought just in case. I stood frozen, watching the shadows in the room shift and stretch until they touched each of us at once, long tendrils that didn't move like light should. Then, a voice, louder now, right behind my ear. You opened the room. Now keep it open. My eyes blurred. Something inside me screamed to close them, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away. In the far corner of the storage unit, a door appeared. Not a real one. Not physical. Just the suggestion of a door, outlined in red light. It opened without noise. And behind it? Nothing. Not darkness. Just absence. Liv screamed. Mark began chanting something old Latin, maybe, or nonsense syllables, meant to mimic a barrier. It didn't matter. The door was open. The room had followed us home, and something had stepped through. I don't remember how we got out of the storage unit. 1 second, we were standing inside a room swallowed in red light, our minds cracking under the weight of something too large to understand. And the next thing I recall is running barefoot across the gravel lot, the cold biting into my skin. Liv was behind me, sobbing, her hoodie torn at the sleeve, and Mark stumbled alongside us, bleeding from his nose and muttering under his breath, like he was still trying to finish a sentence that had started hours ago. We didn't speak. We didn't stop. Not until we'd reached the diner at the edge of town, lights on and doors locked. The waitress inside giving us a double take through the glass as we pounded on it like survivors of a fire. They let us in, called the cops. An ambulance came. They tested us for substances, took our statements, wrote it all off as a bad trip and stress-induced hallucination. We didn't even argue. What else could we say? That we'd seen a door appear in a concrete wall? That a voice without a mouth had told us to keep the room open? That something had followed us out of a digital stream and into real space? The paramedic gave me a blanket and said, "Try to get some rest." I nodded, even though I knew I wouldn't. You don't sleep after something like that. You just close your eyes and wait. Mark vanished 2 days later. No note, no warning. His phone was found at a gas station 90 miles north of town, left on the sink in a locked restroom. His laptop was gone, and his room was stripped of all electronics monitor, drives, even the cables. No digital footprint. It was like he erased himself piece by piece. I called Liv immediately. She'd already heard. Sad she'd been having dreams again, this time of rows of chairs with blank-faced people in them. "I think they're watching something," she whispered. "But I can't see what." I tried to go back to normal life, school, work, talking to people who didn't ask where I'd been. But the red room didn't let go. It crept into the cracks of my routine flickers and phone screens that shouldn't have been on, shadows that didn't belong in places they had no business reaching. Every so often, I'd hear it again, that whisper, like air being drawn through dry leaves. "Witness, stay, open." Then came the final message. An envelope, just like before. Number, name, no return address. Inside was a photo of me, standing at my bedroom window, taken from inside the room. I live alone. There was also a note, typed in red ink on textured paper that smelled like old wood and burnt plastic. It read, "One remains. Stream 0 never ends. You are the door now." My hands went cold. I turned on every light in my apartment. Slept with the TV on. Haven't looked into a mirror since. Not for more than a second. Because I saw something last time, just a flicker, but enough. A shape behind me, smiling. I deleted my Reddit account, burned the old laptop, changed my number. None of it helped. The whisper still comes through vents, through headphones, through the static of radios I haven't turned on in years. And always at the same time, 3:33 a.m., I keep my doors locked. My lights on, but I don't think it matters anymore. Last night, I heard tapping on the window again. 3 soft knocks. I, live on the 5th floor. Final note. Liv hasn't returned my calls in over a week. But today, a new thread appeared on a private subreddit I thought was defunct. Title, Red Room Prime. Seat 1 available. Feed begins midnight. All must watch. The last comment was from a user I didn't recognize, but the icon beside the name wasn't new. It was the symbol from the envelope, the eye, with teeth. And the comment said, "You're next." I found his notebook in a ditch on the side of Highway 6, right where the gravel turns red and the trees grow crooked like fingers. It was wrapped in a torn windbreaker, soaked through, pages curled like old leaves. At first, I thought it was trash, but something about the way it was bundled, almost hidden, made me stop. The first page had a name, Asher Green, and below it, a date April 9th, 2022. I flipped through, half expecting teenage poetry or maybe some survival notes. Instead, I got something else. Looking back though, I should have known better than to open it. If I'd just kept walking, if I hadn't decided to investigate for my blog, I probably wouldn't be hearing the voices now, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll skip the boring stuff. My name's Natalie. I'm 25, and I run a niche travel blog called Driftwood Trails. I used to hike with my brother. He was the outdoorsy one, but he died last year in a freak climbing accident. Since then, I've been doing these trips solo, partly in his memory, partly because I don't know what else to do with myself. I was passing through a no-name patch of Kansas when I stopped at a gas station that looked like it hadn't seen a customer since Y2K. The clerk barely looked up from his paper when I asked about nearby hiking spots. "You don't want to go west," he said, then muttered something about flooding and bad roads. I asked if he knew anything about a place called Morrow's Edge, because Asher's notebook mentioned it repeatedly. The guy froze for a second. Then he laughed this dry, empty sound and said, "Ain't no such place," before going back to his paper. But he was wrong. Morrow's Edge existed. And I have proof. Asher's entries started normal enough. He talked about quitting his job in Denver, trying to disconnect from the noise, and taking a Greyhound across the Midwest. He described Morrow's Edge as a hidden gemma, ghost town with perfect silence and morning fog so thick it swallowed your thoughts. That's how he put it. There was no GPS tag, no Google results, not even a county listing. But in one of the earlier entries, he wrote, "Turn left at the Scarecrow with one eye. Drive till the asphalt ends. Then keep going. You'll hear the creek before you see the town." It sounded like nonsense, except I found the Scarecrow. It was slumped on a pole next to an empty cornfield. One button eye missing, the other barely hanging on. I turned left. The road ended in about 5 miles. I kept going. My Subaru struggled through mud and rock, but eventually the trees parted. And there it was, Morrow's Edge. I know how this sounds. Like one of those fake campfire stories people post to Ornosleep. But I took pictures. I even filmed a short vlog walking through the outskirts. I didn't upload it though. Not yet. There were maybe 20 buildings, all weathered gray and soft around the edges, like they'd been eroding since the Civil War. The strange thing, the town wasn't abandoned. Not exactly. I saw signs of life smoke from one chimney, curtain shifting in a second-story window. There were cars too, just old ones, all at least 20 years out of date. Their plates either rusted clean or blacked out completely. No people though, at least not at first. I stayed in what used to be a general store. Asher had written that it was the only shelter where the rain can't get you. That sentence stuck with me. I didn't know why at the time. Inside, there was a mattress dragged behind the counter, a few canned goods still intact, and scribbled messages on the walls in what looked like charcoal. One of them said, "They come when the rain falls." Another just read, "Cover your ears." I thought about leaving right then, but I didn't. That night, I listened to the wind. It didn't howl like in other towns. It whispered. At first, I thought it was just the creaking of the buildings or maybe animals in the woods. But around 3 a.m., I sat up in my sleeping bag with this feeling like I'd forgotten something important. Something huge. That's when it hit me. The wind was speaking, not in a language, not even clearly, just dot syllables, chopped and scattered like a broken tape recorder. But every now and then, it would say something that made my skin crawl. It said my name. I ran outside with my flashlight. The storm had started, just a slow drizzle at first, but it felt heavier than it looked. Like the rain wanted to press me into the dirt. I called out, "Is anyone there?" Like an idiot, silence. Then, from the woods, I heard a voice that made my heart freeze. It was soft, but clear. Natalie. My name, said exactly the way my brother used to say it. I turned and ran back inside. I didn't sleep. I sat, with Asher's notebook, flipping ahead, desperate for an explanation. The last few entries were frantic. One said, "It's in the water. The storm carries them." Another said, "Voices of the taken." I thought they were dreams, but they remember. They know things they shouldn't. Then the last entry. I heard my mother last night. She's been dead since I was 6. No sign off, no date. Just that, morning came dull and gray. The rain had stopped. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but when I went outside, my phone was gone. I had left it charging by the front window. Now the cord hung there by itself, no sign of the phone. No tracks, nothing. That's when I noticed the footprints, bare, human, and heading out of the store. But not toward the road. They led into the woods, and the wind was already picking up again, despite the strangeness of that first night. There was something oddly peaceful about the town in the daylight. The buildings, while worn down and beaten by the elements, had a sort of frozen-in-time charm. A diner with cracked stools still lined up along a dusty counter. An old barber shop with yellowing newspaper clippings on the walls. Even a post office that looked like it had never received a single delivery since the Clinton era. For a minute, I let myself believe I'd just stumbled into some forgotten slice of Americana. Nothing more than a weird ghost town with a flair for the dramatic. I even laughed at myself for getting spooked by a bad storm and sleep-deprived imagination. I told myself I'd spend one more day, get some great shots for the blog, then head back to the main road. I spent the morning exploring. There were no people, at least not out in the open, but I could swear I was being watched. Not in a paranoid way, not yet. Just that prickling feeling on the back of your neck, like someone studying you just out of sight. Still, nothing threatening happened. I found what looked like a public library, though most of the books were either water-damaged or torn to shreds by mold. Upstairs, I discovered a small room that must have been a break area or staff office. Inside was an old Polaroid camera, a few faded photos scattered on the floor, and an untouched water bottle that hadn't expired, at least not officially. I sat on the edge of a dusty desk, cracked the bottle open, and listened to the wind. That day it wasn't whispering. By early afternoon, the sun had pushed through the clouds. It wasn't warm, exactly, but it was enough to take the edge off. I used the time to document as much as I could: video walkthroughs, landscape shots, a couple self-recorded monologues about the town's layout and mystery. I found a small community bulletin board near the church, which had handwritten notes still pinned up, some yellowed and barely legible, others surprisingly recent. One caught my eye: looking for James, last seen near the stream, call home. If you find this, no date, no phone number, just that. I snapped a picture of it, thinking I'd dig into missing persons records later, maybe link it to Asher. I'll admit, there was a weird kind of comfort in the place during daylight. Maybe it was the silence or the fact that nothing electronic worked. No signal, no GPS, no updates from the outside world. It forced my mind to slow down, and for the first time in months, I wasn't doom-scrolling or obsessively checking the blog's traffic. I thought about staying longer. I know how dumb that sounds now, but at the time it felt like I was meant to be there. As if I was finally doing something that mattered, following a real trail instead of manufacturing mystery for clicks. I remember writing in my notebook, "Morrow's Edge is quiet, and the quiet feels like peace." Back at the general store, I set up camp for the second night. The rain hadn't returned, and the wind was still. I organized my gear, took stock of food, and even cleaned up the corner where I slept. I found a working lantern that ran on old fuel and gave off this flickering, almost nostalgic glow. I remember thinking that it reminded me of camping trips with my brother, when we used to roast marshmallows and make up scary stories. That memory stung, but in a good way. I started reading more of Asher's notebook after dinner, expecting it to turn darker again, but the middle section was surprisingly calm. He described long walks through the woods, encounters with wild animals, and musings about life away from people. He talked about feeling invisible and how that was both terrifying and freeing. One line stayed with me. He wrote, "You don't realize how loud the world is until it stops talking back." I knew exactly what he meant. That evening, I didn't hear voices, just birds in the trees and the occasional creak of timber shifting in the cold. I let my guard down. I let myself believe the worst was in my head, brought on by grief and isolation. I fell asleep faster than I had in weeks. The store felt like home. I even dreamed of something good for once, my brother and I watching fireworks on some forgotten July night. The sky cracked open with color, his laugh rising above the noise. But dreams have a way of lying to you. They wrap you in comfort, just long enough for the fall to hurt more. When I woke up, it was still dark, and something had changed. It wasn't raining yet, but I could smell it. That earthy, thick scent of wet leaves and cold air. It crawled under the door like a warning. I listened, barely breathing. No voices. No footsteps. Just a hum. Low and deep, vibrating through the floorboards. I turned on the lantern, but it flickered strangely, as if it didn't want to stay awake. That's when I realized the room felt wrong. Not cold, exactly, but thinner. Like the air had been stretched too far and was about to snap. Still, I pushed it aside, told myself it was just nerves. I drank some water, checked my backpack, and that's when I saw it. My necklace was gone. A small pendant, gold with a green stone, nothing fancy, but it had belonged to my mom. I never took it off, except to shower. I knew I'd had it when I fell asleep, and now it was gone. I searched everywhere beneath the mattress, through my bag, even behind the counter, but nothing. It wasn't just missing. It had been taken. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no other answer. That morning, I wrote a single line in my own notebook before packing everything up. The town takes things. And as I zipped my pack closed, I felt that hum again closer this time, not outside. Under me, as if something was moving through the bones of the building, slow and heavy. I didn't wait around to find out what. I stepped outside into the fog and tried to retrace my steps from the day before, but something was off. The road looked different. The trees weren't where I remembered them. And the scarecrow, the one with one eye, it was facing a new direction. I tried to stay calm, but the deeper I walked into the fog, the more things around me stopped lining up with what I remembered. The trees felt denser now, like they'd moved in closer overnight, twisting together in impossible ways. The general store was still visible behind me, but it looked smaller, darker. Somehow like something had drained the warmth out of it while I slept. I stood in the middle of the road, trying to get my bearings, but even the path looked wrong. The gravel was darker, almost black in patches, and when I crouched down to check, it stuck to my fingers like soot. I rubbed my hands clean on my jeans, but the smell it left behind was sharp and sour, like burnt rubber and iron. I walked back toward the store to regroup, but that's when I noticed something missing from my pack. My solar charger. I hadn't even unpacked it the night before. It had been tucked into the side pocket with the zipper pulled tight. Now the pocket was open, the charger gone, and the zipper itself looked torn at the seam, like someone had yanked it apart in a hurry. I checked everything else. My wallet, journal, matches, all still there, but the charger and my pendant were now both missing. Not dropped, not forgotten, taken. The thought settled in like a weight behind my ribs. Someone or something had been inside while I slept, right next to me. I tried to tell myself it was animals. Raccoons, maybe. But I'd been camping long enough to know the signs of animal scavenging. This wasn't that. There were no scratch marks, no torn food bags, just two carefully selected items that were personal. I zipped the pocket closed and shouldered the bag again, my fingers shaking slightly as I adjusted the strap. I decided to leave then and there. No more filming. No more exploring. I didn't care how viral the blog post could be. Something about Morrow's Edge had changed overnight, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out what it wanted next. Heading out, I aimed for the path I'd used to enter the town, the dirt trail just past the scarecrow. Except it wasn't there anymore. I don't mean overgrown or hard to see. I mean it was gone. Just vanished. In its place was a narrow footpath that I didn't remember at all, winding through trees that looked far too close together for a car to ever have passed. The scarecrow, still missing one eye, now tilted its head slightly toward me, as if it had been watching me the whole time. I took a step back, nearly dropping my phone out of reflex, only to remember again that it had vanished the day before. I cursed under my breath and turned back toward the center of town. If I couldn't leave the way I came, I needed to figure out another route, and fast. The church caught my eye again, mostly because its steeple seemed taller than before. I know how crazy that sounds, but I swear the roof had been flat and caved in when I first saw it. Now the top rose like a jagged finger above the fog, and a soft light flickered from one of the upstairs windows. I walked toward it, unsure what I was expecting. Maybe another survivor, someone who could explain what the hell was going on. But the closer I got, the more I noticed how off everything felt. The air got colder, even though the sun had broken through the clouds. My breath fogged in front of me, and the silence started to press in again, heavier than before. Inside the church, the pews had been pushed aside, creating a makeshift path straight to the altar. Candles lined the aisle, most burned to their stubs, their wax melted into strange symbols on the wood floor. At the front of the room, just beneath the large stained glass window, was a small wooden box. No lock, no hinges. Just a carved box, maybe the size of a shoebox, sitting perfectly centered. My instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but I didn't. I opened it. Inside was a cassette tape, unmarked except for a single smudge of red wax on one side. Taped to the bottom of the lid was a note in neat handwriting that read, "There. Voices come in rain, but their memories live in this. Do not play after sunset. I took the tape. I shouldn't have. I should have left it right there and gotten the hell out. But I slipped it into my bag anyway, thinking I could find a way to play it later. A tape like that, if it was real, might hold the answers I needed." As I turned to leave, I heard something above me. A soft creak, like weight shifting on a wooden floor. I froze, scanning the upper level, but the loft balcony was empty. No movement, no shadows. Still, the sound came again, clearer this time, a slow, dragging step. I didn't wait for a third. I backed out of the church and nearly tripped on the stone steps outside. The light in the steeple had gone out. By the time I got back to the general store, the sky had darkened again, thick clouds rolling in faster than any weather pattern I'd seen before. The air was electric, like the whole town was holding its breath. I decided I wasn't going to wait for the rain. I packed up everything I had, slung the bag over my shoulder, and started walking the opposite way through town, toward the fields. I figured if I could get high enough, maybe I'd find the road again, or at least signal someone if, by some miracle, my phone reappeared in my bag. I didn't get far before the first raindrop hit the ground. It was heavy, thicker than normal rain, cold, the kind of cold that cuts through your clothes and sinks into your skin. I broke into a jog, keeping my head down, eyes scanning the fields. That's when I heard a voice, not from behind me, not from ahead, from above, a soft whisper on the wind that said, "Natalie ... Where did you go?" I stopped so fast I almost fell. My brother's voice, not close, not distant. Just there, somehow, filling the air around me like a song you forgot until it starts playing again. I covered my ears and kept walking, telling myself it wasn't real. But then I heard it again, closer this time. "Don't leave me here, you promised." That was a promise I'd made when we were kids, something I hadn't told anyone. I fell to my knees in the wet grass, trying to breathe. That's when I noticed the stream nearby thin and winding through the edge of the field. It hadn't been there yesterday. In fact, Asher's journal had said nothing about any streams near the town, but now it looked like it had always been there, cutting through the land like a scar. I watched the water flow and realized something wasn't right. The ripples didn't move with the wind. They pulsed like a heartbeat. I stayed crouched by the stream longer than I should have, trying to convince myself it was just the rain and my mind playing tricks on me. But the longer I watched, the more I realized the stream wasn't behaving like any body of water I'd ever seen. The ripples weren't random, they had rhythm, almost like breathing. When the wind gusted, the stream didn't react. It moved on its own, pulsing and retracting at odd intervals, sometimes going completely still and then surging forward as if exhaling. It made me think of something alive, and that was enough to push me back on my feet. My legs aching from kneeling on soaked grass, I made my way back toward the general store, hoping to get under shelter before the storm picked up again. The town looked even more abandoned than before. The buildings, already crumbling and sun-bleached, now seemed warped, like their angles had twisted slightly when I wasn't looking. Windows were open that had been shut, and signs that once hung straight now tilted toward the ground. The church steeple had vanished behind thick fog, and I could barely make out the path I'd taken earlier. As I walked, the rain picked up thin. At first, but gradually thickening into a steady pour that soaked through my jacket in minutes. With each drop, I felt heavier, like the rain wasn't just water, but something denser, something that clung to me and refused to let go. Back inside the general store, I peeled off my wet layers and tried to warm up using a small emergency blanket and my backup thermal shirt. That's when I noticed the journal wasn't where I'd left it. I had placed Asher's notebook next to my sleeping bag the night before, right by the lantern. Now it was across the room, resting on top of a shelf. I hadn't touched. My heart sank. I hadn't moved it. And there was no one else here. I picked it up, my hands trembling just a little, and flipped to the last entry again. Something new had been written below it. Not in Asher's handwriting. Not in any handwriting at all, really. Just thick, jagged lines scrawled like a child. Had used a nail to scratch words into the damp paper. "You're listening now." That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone. The air felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't explain but instinctively feel in your bones. I stood there, soaked and shivering, staring at those words until the lantern flickered, dimmed, and then went out completely. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just listened. And that's when I heard it, the soft, almost inaudible sound of someone humming. Not a tune I recognized, but the kind of lullaby someone might hum to themselves in the dark. It was coming from the far end of the store, behind the counter where the shadows were thickest. I stepped forward, slowly, unsure if I wanted to see what was waiting for me. But by the time I reached the back of the store, the sound had stopped. Nothing was there. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching my flashlight and keeping one hand on the emergency knife in my pocket. I watched the door. I watched the windows. And just before dawn, I saw something move past the glass. It was fast, just a blur but unmistakably human-shaped. I waited, barely breathing, but it didn't come back. I wanted to believe it was just some drifter, another lost traveler like me, but something about the way it moved was all wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. almost like it hadn't touched the ground at all. When the rain finally stopped, I ventured out again. I needed to find a way out of town, even if it meant walking straight into the woods without a trail. I packed everything I had, made sure the cassette tape was secured, and left the store without looking back. As I passed the church, I noticed something carved into the door that hadn't been there before. Stay until you understand. I didn't stop to study it. I kept walking through the main street and into the trees behind the last row of houses. The woods were thicker than I remembered, and it felt like the branches reached down toward me as I pushed forward, snagging at my sleeves and hair. I walked for what felt like hours, the sun never fully breaking through the mist. The trees stretched on endlessly, and every now and then I'd pass something that made my stomach tighten: a shoe nailed to a tree, an empty tent half swallowed by roots, even a broken camera wrapped in moss. It was as if the forest was collecting things from the people who had tried to leave. I didn't know if it had collected people too, but I was starting to suspect it had. I began hearing voices again, not full sentences, just fragments. Some were familiar, some were strangers, all layered and distant, as if carried by the damp air itself. Eventually, I stumbled onto a clearing. In the center was a single bench, old and half buried in the ground. Sitting on it was a cassette player. No wires, no batteries. Just sitting there, dry as bone despite the storm. I didn't want to touch it. I really didn't. But I couldn't help myself. I slipped the tape into the deck, expecting nothing. But when I hit play, it began to spin. At first, just static. Then, slowly, voices began to fade in. Not one voice, many. All layered over each other, whispering names, dates, places. I heard my own name. I heard my brother's voice. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The tape spoke a name I hadn't heard in years. Lena Myers, my childhood best friend. She had gone missing when we were 12, vanishing on a camping trip with her parents. They never found her. I hadn't thought about her in forever. But there her name was, clear as day. Lena Myers, April 14th, Cabin 8. I didn't know what Cabin 8 meant. I didn't want to know. I stopped the tape, but the whispers continued, still coming from the player, even though it had stopped spinning. I dropped it and ran. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a tree somewhere deep in the woods. I stayed there for hours, crying quietly, unsure if I was hallucinating or losing my mind. That night, I didn't go back to the general store. I built a makeshift shelter out of a top and branches, huddled underneath it, and waited for morning. The voices never left. They were quieter but constant, whispering just outside the range of understanding. That's when it hit me. The town doesn't just trap people, it remembers them, holds onto pieces of them. Maybe forever. By the time the sun rose, or what passed for sunrise in that place, I was cold to my core. I hadn't slept, not really. I must have drifted off here and there, but the whispers were always there, like a foghorn in the distance. That keeps tugging at your brain just when you're about to slip into real sleep. My whole body ached from lying on the uneven ground, and when I finally stood up, I felt like I hadn't moved in days. I decided I couldn't spend another night in the woods. Whatever was happening in Morrow's Edge, I needed to understand it, because if I didn't, I was starting to believe I might never leave. I followed the edge of the woods, keeping the town just within view, but never going back to the center. That was where the air felt thickest, where the buildings breathed, when you weren't looking. Instead, I started circling, trying to see if there were places Asher might have explored that I hadn't. His notebook had grown even stranger toward the end passages, repeating, words scratched out and rewritten as if he couldn't decide what was real anymore. But there was one recurring phrase that I hadn't noticed before, and now it kept coming back to me. The shed behind the yellow house. He mentioned it twice, but never described what was inside. Just a note, don't open it if it's raining. There was only one yellow house in town, and it looked like it had been burned partially on one side, the siding blackened and warped from what must have been a fire years ago. The windows were gone, replaced by boards and tarps, and the front porch sagged under its own weight. Behind it, mostly hidden by overgrowth and a leaning willow tree, was a small, crooked shed. The door hung half open, and something about it made my stomach twist. Still, the sky was clear. For once, there wasn't a single drop of rain in the air. I reminded myself of Asher's warning, but only about opening it in the rain, so I crept closer and pushed the door fully open. The smell hit me first. Not rot exactly, but old wet wood mixed with something sweet and sour, like moldy jam. Inside, it was packed wall to wall with old photo albums, dozens of them stacked on crude shells, their leather covers warped and cracked with age. I pulled one down at random and flipped it open. The pictures were faded but intact. People, all smiling in that stiff way only film captures, families, couples, kids. Some of the clothes looked modern, some were decades old. But the strange part wasn't just the photos. It was that none of them had names, no captions, no dates. Just image after image of strangers. And then I found one I recognized. It was Asher, sitting by a campfire, holding a cup of coffee, staring off to the side like someone had called his name just before the shutter clicked. The background wasn't a forest or a campsite. It was the street outside the general store. The caption under the photo, written in the same sharp handwriting as the scrawled note in the notebook, simply read, "Stayed too long." I flipped faster now, scanning through pages, not even pretending to be careful anymore. And that's when I found the second one that made my breath catch in my throat. It was me, standing outside the church. The photo had to have been taken that morning, because I was wearing the same jacket, the same mud-streaked jeans. My expression was tense. My face turned halfway toward the camera, like I was listening for something just out of frame. The caption under this one read, "Listens too well." I dropped the book and stepped back, my heartbeat so loud I could hear it in my ears. How the hell had a photo of me been developed, printed, and bound into an album that was clearly years old? I backed out of the shed and slammed the door shut behind me, hands shaking, legs barely steady enough to hold me upright. That's when I heard the whisper again. This time it was closer, directly in my ear, though no one was near me. It said, "You're part of it now." I spun around, expecting something, anything, but the air was still. The trees didn't even move. Nothing did. I ran from that yard like my life depended on it. I didn't stop until I reached the far end of town, where the landscape shifted from buildings to open hills. I crouched behind an old bus stop, knees to my chest, trying not to sob. I had to face it. This wasn't just a haunted town. It was a place that took people and recorded them, like it wanted to keep some version of them forever. Memories, voices, even their faces. Whatever made it do that, whatever collected them, was still active, still watching. And I was next in line. When I finally pulled myself together, I took stock of what I still had. My backpack, a few snacks, the cassette, and Asher's journal. I flipped through again, slower this time, looking for anything I'd missed. There, near the very back, tucked into the binding, was a folded sheet of paper I hadn't noticed before. It was a map, crude, hand-drawn, just outlines and a few key landmarks labeled: the general store, the church, the yellow house, the shed, and something else, the circle. It was marked at the far end of the forest, beyond a line of text that read, "Only if desperate, only in silence." Desperate didn't even begin to cover it. Whatever the circle was, I had a feeling it was either an escape or a final trap. But I was out of options. I stared at that map until the sun began to drop again. I had just one more night before I broke completely. I could feel it. And that night the storm returned. The storm came in fast, not like the others. This one didn't creep in with a drizzle or stir the wind gently before building. It hit like a curtain being ripped open. The sky went black within minutes, and the first drops were so loud against the roof of the old bus stop that I flinched, covering my ears on instinct. It felt like the town had been waiting, holding its breath, and now, with the clouds split open, it was finally exhaling. But the breath wasn't warm. It was cold and sharp and filled with voices that didn't belong to anyone still living. I made the mistake of looking up. Rain poured sideways, thick and heavy, soaking through my hood in seconds. But more than that, I saw movement shapes that didn't make sense. Figures that blurred when I tried to focus on them, sliding across rooftops and down walls like shadows pretending to be human. They didn't walk, they didn't run. They just moved, fast and fluid, bending around corners and slipping between buildings without making a sound. All I could hear were the voices. Not in my head, not like before, but in the storm itself. Like the rain was carrying whispers instead of water. I bolted. No direction, no plan. Just running, splashing through puddles that reflected things I refused to look at twice. I kept thinking about the map, the crude sketch of the town, and the final destination it pointed toward, the circle. The name meant nothing, but in that moment, it was my only shot. The woods were darker now, the trees slick with water and twitching in the wind, but I followed the path the best I could. My boots slipped in the mud, branches tore at my jacket, and I could feel the weight of everything I'd seen catching up to me. As I neared the forest's edge, I passed the general store again. Its front window was shattered now, the inside darker than before, like it had sunk deeper into the ground. I saw something inside, or maybe it saw me. A shape, tall and still, standing behind the counter like it had been waiting for me to come. Back, for a heartbeat, I was frozen in place, soaked to the bone, and watching it watch me. Then lightning struck, close enough to shake the ground, and the shape was gone. Just like that, gone. I kept moving, clutching the map to my chest like a lifeline. I didn't stop until I reached the tree line. That's when I heard it again, my brother's voice. Clear this time. Strong. You're almost there. Don't. Stop now. I knew it wasn't him. I knew. But the voice sounded so real that for a moment I let myself believe he could somehow be waiting at the end of this nightmare. The trees opened into a clearing just as another flash of lightning lit the sky, and there it was. The circle dot, it wasn't a structure, not really. It was a depression in the earth, about 20 feet wide, ringed with stones that had been painted or stained with something dark. In the center sat a pile of belongings, backpacks, shoes, jackets, even cameras. Some modern, some old enough to have belonged to hikers from 30 years ago. It was like a lost and found for the damned. I stepped closer, heart pounding, rain dripping off my eyelashes as I scanned the pile. One object stood out immediately: my phone. It was resting on top of a cracked leather bag, screen lit, battery somehow charged. I reached for it slowly, like it might vanish. When my fingers closed around it, the screen flickered. No signal, of course, but the voice recorder app was open, and it had been running for over 6 hours. I hit stop, then play. The recording began with the usual ambient noise: rain, wind, my own breathing. But then I heard something else. The sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving inside the general store. Then the sound of something being dragged. A pause. Then my name, spoken in a dozen voices layered on top of each other, like a chorus of broken people. Natalie, stay. Natalie, stay. I dropped the phone and backed out of the circle. My skin crawled and my head spun. I should have walked away. The warning was clear, but I couldn't leave yet. Something in that pile, something underneath, caught my eye. A notebook, Asher's notebook. Not the one I had, a different one. This one was burnt at the edges, the cover warped. I picked it up and opened it to the middle. The handwriting was frantic, as if the person had been writing in the dark while trembling. One passage had been circled over and over until the pen tore the paper. It read, "You can't leave with the voices. If you hear them, they hear you. If you answer, you stay." Suddenly, the wind dropped off completely. No rain, no thunder, just silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. And then I felt it. Not heard, felt, like the air around me was watching. The trees weren't swaying anymore. They were leaning, bending in toward the clearing as if to trap me. I turned and ran, not bothering with a trail, just sprinting through underbrush and branches, willing my legs to work through the panic. I didn't stop until I burst out onto the cracked 2-lane road that led back toward Highway 6. The road was dry, the sky above it clear. I kept walking until my legs gave out. Hours later, a farmer in a rusted pickup spotted me and gave me a ride to the nearest town. He didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. When I asked him if he'd ever heard of Morrow's Edge, he frowned and shook his head. "Doesn't ring a bell," he said. "Nothing but woods out that way. Been that way for years." It's been 3 weeks since I left Morrow's Edge, and I still haven't fully come back. Physically, sure, I'm back in my apartment, sleeping. In my own bed, eating real food that doesn't come from a vacuum-sealed pouch. But something followed me out of that place. Something I can't see but feel every time the sky goes gray and the wind picks up just right. It's in the spaces between words, in the quiet moments before sleep. It waits. I hear it in my dreams, whispering in the same voices I thought I left behind: my brother, Asher, even Lena Myers, who I haven't seen since I was 12, but now haunts my thoughts like we spoke just yesterday. I tried to explain to a few people what happened, but it always came out sounding like a story I made up, like something ripped from a bad horror subreddit. I even wrote a blog post, drafted and edited and stared at it for hours before finally deleting it. Because the thing is, I still don't understand how much of what I experienced was real, and how much was shaped by that town's strange gravity. Morrow's Edge doesn't just swallow people, it reworks them, presses their memories into new forms, and scatters them back into the world like ashes on the wind. Some nights I sit up late and try to retrace my path through those woods on Google Earth, but that area, it's just blank forest, no road, no burned yellow house, no circle. The cassette I recovered, if that's even what it still is, doesn't play anymore. I took it to 3 different places, and every time the players shorted out or wouldn't power on at all. One technician told me it was magnetically scrambled beyond recovery. But that's the strange part. When I hold it in my hands, I can feel something, like heat pulsing faintly through the plastic. Not warm exactly, but rhythmic, like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to me. I've locked it away in a metal box under my bed, but every now and then, especially when it rains, I swear I can hear a muffled humming sound coming from it. I haven't touched it since Dot asked for Asher's notebook. I mailed it anonymously to a paranormal researcher I once interviewed. For the blog, no return address. Just a note, you'll know what to do. I haven't heard back. Maybe I never will. But even after getting rid of it, the things it revealed, the photo of me that shouldn't exist, the hidden pages, the impossible drawings, they linger in my memory with perfect clarity. I've tried distracting myself, visiting friends, reading, drinking too much wine, and watching dumb comedies until I pass out. But nothing helps for long, because I know the truth. I was marked. 2 nights ago, it rained again. Nothing major, just a steady drizzle, the kind that usually puts me to sleep. But at exactly 3:11 a.m., I woke up with a start. Not from a dream, not from any sound, just aware. And there, through my barely open window, I heard it. A voice, my brother's voice, faint but unmistakable, drifting up from the alley behind my apartment. He said, "It's not over, Nat. You left, but not all of you did. I didn't move. Couldn't. I lay frozen for what felt like hours until dawn light finally broke through the blinds. I checked the alley in the morning. Nothing there. But I found something sitting on my doorstep, a Polaroid photo in a Ziploc bag. The image was blurry but familiar. It was me, standing outside the general store in Morrow's Edge, looking towards something behind the camera. The caption read, "She came back." I haven't shown anyone the photo. I keep it hidden behind a drawer, buried under old tax documents and passport renewals, but I check it every day. The weirdest thing? The background keeps changing, slowly. Trees that weren't there before, a new shadow in one corner. And now, just yesterday, a second figure has started to appear, faint and distant, standing just at the edge of the frame. I don't know who it is, but I have a sick feeling I'm about to find out. I've started hearing static in my earbuds when I walk alone. It only happens near water, Puddles, rain-soaked gutters, even the fountain by my local coffee shop. At first, I thought it was just bad luck or cheap headphones. But now, every time it happens, the audio app on my phone opens by itself, voice recorder flashing like it's picking something up. When I play the file back, it's always the same thing. Breathing, wind, then the sound of someone walking just behind me. Always just a few steps back, never closer, never farther. I've stopped wearing headphones. Last night, I got a message through the old blog account, the one I haven't used since before the trip. It came through the contact form, unsigned, no IP address traceable. The message read, "You heard them. They remember. You took something with you. Come finish it." Attached was an image file, grainy and dark. I opened it and my stomach dropped. It was the clearing. The circle, same as before. But now there was a new object in the center of the pile, a cracked Polaroid camera. Mine. I haven't told anyone. I wouldn't even be writing this if I didn't feel like I had to. Like documenting it might somehow keep it at bay. Like telling you, yes, you, whoever you are, might mean I'm not the only one it's watching. Because the truth is, I haven't seen the last of Morrow's Edge. I know it's still there. Waiting, growing, calling. And some part of me, God help me, wants to go back. Because sometimes, in the quiet after the rain, I hear my own voice whispering to me from the dark. And she says, "You forgot something. Come home." I know how ridiculous this sounds, but my friends and I have this yearly tradition we started back in college called cabin roulette. Every spring, we each pick a random remote cabin listing from whatever sketchy rental site we can find. Never the big names like Airbnb or Vrbo. The rules are simple. The cabin has to be under $300 total for the weekend, have no more than 5 reviews, and be somewhere without reliable cell service. That's it. Whoever finds the weirdest one that doesn't kill us wins the round. Stupid, I know. But when you've been friends since freshman year and half of you are still clinging to the same inside jokes from 2014, dumb games like this become sacred. This year, it was my turn to choose. The pressure was on, especially after what Cam found last spring, a treehouse in Montana that had an outdoor shower made from an old beer keg and a toilet with a goat path leading to it. But this time, I wanted something different. Something that looked normal. You know, the kind of place that seems boring until you get there and discover the furniture is all made from driftwood. Or there's an old VHS collection of public access doomsday tapes. I spent a week digging through forums and message boards until I found it. A single photo of a 2-bedroom cabin tucked between 2 massive pine trees in the Pacific Northwest. The listing had no written reviews, just 5 stars across the board. The description simply read, "All welcome. No pets, no parties. Come quiet, leave quieter." At first, I figured the host was just some burnt-out tech guy trying to cash in on the horror aesthetic. The price was weirdly low, $87 per night, but the photos looked legit. Rustic but clean, surrounded by woods thick enough to drown out even the most obnoxious Bluetooth speaker. The listing didn't have an address, just GPS coordinates and a message that said, "Follow the mile marker and listen for the wind chimes." The site wasn't Airbnb either. It was something called Red Hollow, a booking platform none of us had heard of, but looked just credible enough not to trip our scam alarms. That's kind of the sweet spot we aim for. I booked it on a Wednesday. Got a confirmation email that just said, "See you soon," and a PDF with vague directions. I figured I'd get more info closer to the weekend, but nothing else ever came. Still, I wasn't worried. This kind of thing wasn't new to us. We'd stayed in converted school buses, underground bunkers, even a place in Nevada that turned out to be an abandoned animal hospital. Most of it was sketchy in a fun way. Nobody had ever been hurt. Nothing had ever gone truly wrong. So when Friday rolled around, we packed up the Subaru, grabbed too much beer, not enough food, and headed north. It was me, Cam, Sasha, and Danny this year. 4 of us total. We'd all drifted into different careers. Cam worked freelance like me. Sasha was getting her doctorate in clinical psych, and Danny taught coding boot camps, but cabin roulette kept us connected. Once a year, we dropped everything and acted like dumb undergrads again. No social media, no expectations. Just backwoods nonsense and 3 days of pretending we weren't slowly becoming real adults. That drive up was the last time everything felt light. The directions got weird about 2 hours out. Highway turned to dirt road. Dirt road turned to logging trail. Eventually, we reached the mile marker referenced in the listing. Eventually, piece of plywood nailed to a tree with the number 44 painted in red. Just past that, hanging from a branch, was a single wind chime made of bones, not plastic, not metal. Actual bones. We joked about it, laughed way too hard, and made dumb Blair Witch comments. But deep down, I felt something twist a little in my chest. That moment of wait, is this actually too far? We'd always prided ourselves on pushing boundaries. But something about the way those bones moved in the still air made me feel watched. Still, we pressed on. After a narrow turn that scraped both sides of the car with pine branches, we reached a small clearing. The cabin was exactly like the photos wouldn't, 2 stories, weathered but sturdy. The front porch was wide and sagging a little in the center, and the only thing on it was a single wooden rocking chair positioned to face the woods instead of the cabin. There were no lights on, no host, no signage. Just a key left in the mailbox with a note that said, "We keep no clocks. Respect the quiet." Cam gave me a slow clap. "Dude," he said, grinning, "this is serial killer material. I love it." Inside, the cabin was even more stripped down than the photos suggested. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and an open living. Space with a wood stove and a single couch that had been stitched together with what looked like fishing line. There was no Wi-Fi, no television, and no central heat, just a box of matches, a stack of dry logs, and another note on the mantelpiece. "If it knocks, don't answer. Even if it knows your name." Danny laughed when he read it out loud, then pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a deer skull. We all rolled our eyes. Creepy decor was expected at this point. What stood out, though, was the silence. I don't mean peaceful forest quiet. I mean no birds, no wind, no rustle of squirrels in the trees. Just the sound of our own boots on the floorboards and the occasional creak of the wood settling. Sasha noticed it first. "Is it weird we haven't seen any wildlife?" she asked while unpacking. "Usually these places have at least some kind of noise." I shrugged and blamed it on elevation, maybe the storm front moving in. But even I had to admit, it felt more like the forest was holding its breath. That night, we lit the wood stove, made ramen, drank too many cheap beers, and told old stories like we always did. It almost felt normal again. No one mentioned the wind chime. No one brought up the note about knocking. We were used to spooky gimmicks, and we knew how to laugh through them. But something about the air in that cabin made our voices sound louder than they should have. Like we were filling a space that didn't want to be filled. When we finally called it a night, I remember walking into my room and noticing something odd. The window had no lock, just a latch that barely held the warped frame in place. I checked it twice, stuffed a hoodie in the gap for good measure, and tried to fall asleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was waiting for something. Not us exactly, just time. Like we were on someone else's schedule. And that schedule had just started counting down. The second morning, the cabin was somehow colder than it had been the night before. I don't mean temperature alone though, yeah. We could see our breath even inside, I mean in tone. The stillness outside had thickened, like the trees had leaned closer during the night. No one said it out loud, but we were all a little more subdued at breakfast. The fire had gone out at some point and the stove was cold. When Cam tried to relight it, the matches wouldn't strike. All of them, a whole box, damp despite being sealed in plastic. Sasha joked that maybe the place was haunted by an old park ranger who hated breakfast heat, and Danny muttered something about it being part of the charm, but none of us laughed as hard as we usually would. After we gave up on warm food, Cam pulled out the itinerary he'd scribbled in Sharpie on the inside of a beer box. "All right," he said, trying to sound upbeat. "Cabin Roulette Schedule 2024. Day 1. Unpack, drink, lose badly at Uno. Day 2. Ghost stories, hiking, and audio scavenger hunt." He grinned, and I groaned, because I knew exactly what he was referring to. A couple years back, Cam had come up with this idea where we each pick a place near the cabin, plant an old MP3 recorder, and take turns listening to the woods for an hour, like a backwoods EVP session. We'd done it twice before, usually ended up with nothing but raccoon shuffling and one time a guy peeing in the bushes near our tent. But this place, I had to admit, was perfect for it. Danny handed out the recorders. We each had a little blue handheld device we'd labeled with Sharpie. Years ago, and we reviewed the basic rules. You choose a spot out of sight of the cabin. You place your recorder at head level. You announce the start time clearly into the mic. You leave it running for exactly 60 minutes. No phones. No chatting. And above all, you never listen to your own recording first. That rule started as a joke, but we stuck with it because it added to the suspense. We'd trade devices, listen in pairs, and try to guess whose was whose by the ambient noise. We told ourselves it was for fun, but deep down, I think we hoped something unexplainable might show up. Around noon, we split up. Cam took the trail behind, the outhouse that led toward the dry creek bed. Sasha went east, following a narrow deer path that faded into a dense patch of pine. Danny headed straight out into the open field where the grass was taller than our knees. I stayed near the cabin, taking the slope behind it that led down toward a cluster of standing stones. They didn't look natural, more like someone had propped up 3 large boulders in a triangle, with a smaller flat stone in the center. I assumed it was just leftover logging marker or some kind of pioneer grave, but now I'm not so sure. I placed my recorder on one of the stones, clicked the button, and said clearly, "Start time 1:12 p.m. Then I stepped back, set my timer, and walked away. I returned to the cabin, sat on the porch, and tried not to check my phone out of habit. Even though we had no service, it was supposed to be relaxing, just listening to the wind, watching the branches sway. But that's when I realized something I hadn't noticed before. There was no wind. Not a single leaf moved. Not even the hanging chime on the porch stirred. It was like the air had been vacuum sealed around us. At exactly 2:12 p.m., we regrouped. Everyone handed over their recorders without comment, as per the rules. We went inside, threw more logs on the stove, and took turns listening. Cam got mine first. Sasha took Danny's. I ended up with Cam's. We played them on an old portable. Speaker one at a time, while the others listened quietly. Cam's was mostly normal. A few crows, some shuffling, the faint sound of his breathing as he walked away at the start. Sasha raised an eyebrow at one point but didn't say anything. We chalked it up to a fox or a deer. Nothing strange. But then we got to Danny's. His recording started quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the faint hiss of empty space. About 15 minutes in, there was a pop, like someone had tapped the microphone. Then ... footsteps. Soft ones. Then a voice, not Danny's, not any of ours. It was female, faint, whispering something we couldn't quite make out. Sasha turned pale. "Rewind that," she said, leaning closer. We played it again. The voice came through the static slowly, like it had been buried beneath the noise. "You shouldn't be here." Then silence. Then laughter, brief, dry, and cut off sharply, like the recorder had glitched. Danny tried to laugh it off, but I could tell he was shaken. "Could be bleed," he said. "Like radio interference or an old emergency channel. Or maybe a hiker with a radio, but no one bought it." We hadn't seen a single person since arriving, and this cabin wasn't exactly near any trails. Cam played mine next, and while there were no voices, there was something else, a rhythmic thudding that started at the 42-minute mark and didn't stop. Not footsteps, not branches, just ... thudding in a slow, steady beat, like someone was knocking on a wall from very far away. We all sat there, uneasy, not sure whether to laugh or call it a win for cabin roulette. I tried to brush it off. Maybe someone had returned to the cabin and didn't realize the mics were still running. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. That sound hadn't come from anywhere near us. It sounded deep, like it had been recorded underground. None of us said it directly, but something had shifted in the room after we finished listening. We were quieter, jittery, like we were waiting for something to happen next. That night, none of us slept well. The stove kept going out, and every time I drifted off, I thought I heard footsteps just beyond the porch. Not crunching in leaves, just slow, deliberate shifts in weight, like someone was trying to stay just out of view. At 3:17 a.m., I sat up in bed and looked out the window. The wind chime was moving, but the trees were still, The third day started with all of us pretending to be fine. No one brought up the voice on Danny's recorder or the slow knocking on mine. Cam made coffee over the wood stove and passed around granola bars like it was any other morning in any other cabin, but none of us met each other's eyes for long. Sasha had dark circles under hers and didn't say much. Danny kept glancing at the recorder he'd left on the table, like he expected it to start playing again on its own. I just wanted to pack up and leave, but we'd made a pact years ago, 3 nights, no matter what. No one ever left early. It had become a point of pride, the kind that makes you stay even when every instinct says to run to keep ourselves busy. We stuck to the plan. We went hiking through the woods behind the cabin, following a trail that barely qualified as one, just a faint line of trampled pine needles weaving between the trees. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of twigs snapping underfoot. The air was unnaturally still, and after about half a mile, the trees started to look wrong. Too close together. Branches growing inward toward the trail like claws instead of outward toward the light. We tried to keep the mood light. Cam joked about forest gnomes, and Danny kept quoting Blair Witch lines under his breath, but the humor didn't stick. Every 10 feet, one of us would stop and look behind us, convinced we'd heard something move, but nothing ever did. About an hour in, we came across a strange clearing. It was circular, maybe 30 feet wide, with a perfectly even ring of small, sharp stones laid around the edge. No plants grew in the circle, not even moss. It was like something had scorched the ground just enough to keep it sterile. In the center, nailed to a post, was a mirror cracked down the middle and too clean to have been sitting out there for long. Cam walked toward it without hesitation, pulled out his phone, and snapped a photo. But the second he looked at the screen, he froze. "Weird," he muttered, tapping it. "There's a glare, but there's no sun." He turned the phone toward us, and sure enough, the mirror was reflecting light that didn't exist in the clearing. We left the circle in silence. No one said it aloud, but we all felt it, that sense that we'd crossed into something we weren't supposed to see. The rest of the hike was quiet. We didn't joke. We didn't even point out the weird deer bones we saw arranged in a pattern near a tree stump. When we got back to the cabin, the porch light one we hadn't noticed before and hadn't seen working was on. It flickered once as we stepped onto the deck, then went dark. Cam went inside first, calling out, "Honey, we're home." In a mock cheery voice. But the cabin felt colder than when we'd left, and everything inside had a fine layer of dust over it, like it had been sitting empty for weeks. That night, we finally broke our rule. We listened to the recordings in secret. At least I did. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I got up and crept out to the main room, grabbed Cam's recorder from the table, and pressed play. At first, it was nothing, just wind and footsteps. Then, around the 30-minute mark, something changed. There was a high-pitched tone, like feedback from an old TV, followed by a second voice. It wasn't words exactly. It was breathing, close, deep, rhythmic, like someone standing right beside the recorder, inhaling so hard it crackled the mic. Then, faintly, a whisper. "Stay." I turned it off. My hands were shaking. I slipped the recorder back where I'd found it and went to the front door. just to check. I told myself I'd look out through the glass, see nothing, and go back to bed. But when I reached for the doorknob, I noticed something on the wood, 4 perfect claw marks carved deep into the frame, right at eye level. Not random scratches, not wear and tear. These were fresh, deliberate, wide apart like fingers. I stepped back slowly, suddenly aware of how loud the silence was again, and how something outside that door might still be waiting. I didn't sleep after that. Just laid on the mattress, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house breathe. Because that's what it had started to feel like. The creaks and groans of the wooden frame weren't random anymore. They came in patterns, in waves like a living thing shifting in its sleep. And every time I heard the wind chime clink on the porch, I felt like something outside was getting closer. Like it had learned our names. Like it knew we were still inside. By the time morning rolled around, none of us bothered pretending anymore. The tension in the cabin was heavy and sticky, like the walls were sweating with secrets we weren't supposed to know. We sat around the cold wood stove, sipping bad coffee from chipped mugs, no one talking unless they had to. It wasn't just nerves, we'd been spooked before. This was something different. Sasha kept pacing like she couldn't stand still, rubbing her hands together like she was trying to wake herself up from a dream. Danny looked exhausted, eyes red-rimmed and twitchy, like he hadn't slept at all. Cam kept checking his phone, even though we hadn't had a signal since the first night. I didn't even pretend to have an appetite. My stomach had been in knots since I saw those claw marks by the door. After a long stretch of silence, Cam finally spoke. "All right," he said, flat but firm. "Let's just say it out loud. Something's not right here." We all looked at him, but no one argued. Sasha stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, arms crossed tightly across her chest. "Did any of you see the porch light flicker again last night?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, twice. Once at midnight, then again just before sunrise." Danny ran a hand through his hair and laughed under his breath, but it didn't sound amused. "I woke up around 3, he said. There was someone walking around the cabin, heavy steps, circling. I didn't look. I just ... lay there and waited for it to stop." We sat in silence after that, the kind that makes you want to fill it with something, anything, but none of us had the right words. I finally stood and grabbed my recorder off the shelf. "Let's check the files," I said. "Really check them. No more swapping for fun. We listen to our own, and we figure out what the hell is going on." No one argued. We spread out, headphones in, each of us lost in our own audio hell. I listened to mine in the corner of the room with my back against the wall, the cord wrapped tight around my hand. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. Just the sounds of the woods, some distant birds, my own voice muttering a time stamp. Then, at minute 22, a clicking started. Faint at first, like someone tapping wood with a metal object. It grew louder, more erratic, as if whoever or whatever was making the sound was getting impatient. Then, at minute 31, the breathing started. Close again. Heavy and wet, like lungs too large to belong to anything human. And then the voice, whispering in a dry rasp, "He's not who he says he is." I ripped the headphones out, heart racing, palms slick with sweat. I didn't even know what that was supposed to mean. Sasha stood up next. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she set her recorder down. "Mine has singing on it," she said quietly. "Like a lullaby. I don't know the language. It doesn't sound ... right. Like it was layered over itself too many times. Like it's looping, but not quite." She swallowed hard. "And it ends with my name, over and over again." Whispered by kids. Cam was next. Mine had footsteps. He said, but not walking. It sounded like someone crawling. Around me, over and over. And every now and then, it would stop like it was listening for something. For me, only Danny hadn't spoken. He sat hunched over, earbuds still in, eyes fixed on the floor. I moved toward him slowly. "Danny?" He didn't react. I touched his shoulder, and he jolted like I'd shocked him. He pulled the earbuds out and stared at me for a long moment before saying, "It was my mom. She died 2 years ago. But her voice is on there. She's calling me by my old nickname. The one no one here even knows. And then she says something else." He swallowed hard. "She says, if you leave, I stay. If you stay, I leave." I don't even know what that means. We didn't know what to do after that. We didn't argue. We didn't pack. We just sat there. 4 people who had come looking for something weird and found something real instead. Something ancient and patient and tied to this place in a way we couldn't explain. We tried to distract ourselves by cleaning, organizing gear, pretending like we were preparing for a hike. But we were all listening to the wind that didn't move, to the chime that barely rang, to the walls that creaked in patterns too precise to be random. That afternoon, Cam found something behind the cabin. He was gathering wood for one last fire when he noticed a second path, one we hadn't seen before. It cut sharply to the right of the original trail, hidden by a thicket of bramble that didn't look natural. It had been placed there, carefully, like someone didn't want it to be found. Cam pushed through it anyway and discovered what looked like an old shed. More like a cellar entrance, really. A door built into the side of a hill, half buried under moss and pine needles. No lock. Just a heavy wooden plank slid across the front like a barricade. He didn't open it. Thank God. But when he came back and told us, Sasha turned white as a sheet. "I saw that in my dream," she whispered. "Last night, the hill, the door, something knocking from inside." Cam didn't laugh. None of us did. We decided to stay inside the rest of the day. We locked all the doors, even though most of them barely worked, and closed every curtain. And then we waited, unsure what we were waiting for, only knowing that something had shifted again. Something had noticed us noticing it. That night, the silence broke. It started just after midnight. I was lying in my bunk with the blanket pulled up to my chin, wide awake and listening. Not to anything specific, just listening. The way you do when your body knows something is about to go wrong before your brain can process it. I was hyper-aware of every sound in that cabin. The groan of the old wood beams expanding. The faint creak of Cam turning over in the bunk above me. The slow tick of Sasha's analog wristwatch on the windowsill. But then, like someone had flipped a switch, everything just stopped. The stillness that followed was absolute. No breathing. No wind. The kind of silence that presses into your eardrums and makes your heart beat louder just to fill the space. And that's when I heard it, a knock. One single, soft knock at the front door. Not a banging, not urgent. Just a single, measured tap. It was so gentle, I almost convinced myself it was the cabin settling. But then it came again. Same tone, same rhythm. Like whoever, or whatever, was outside had all the time in the world. And somehow, that made it worse. I held my breath, praying. No one else heard it, that maybe I could pretend it hadn't happened. But footsteps creaked in the hall, and I knew someone else had gotten up. I slipped out of bed and padded quietly to the main room, where Cam was already standing by the window, peeking through the curtain. His face was pale in the moonlight. "No one's there," he whispered, "but the wind chime. It's still. It's completely still." I stepped beside him and looked through the glass. The porch was empty. But there, just beyond the railing, were fresh footprints in the dirt bare feet. Long, too long. Toes splayed like claws. Before either of us could move, the knock came again. Louder this time. From the back door dot, we froze. There had never been a back door. At least, not one we'd noticed. We all scoured this place the first day we arrived. There was only one entrance, one exit. But now, the knock was unmistakable. And it was coming from a spot behind the kitchen where there should have been nothing but a solid wall. Cam stepped back, and I followed him into the hallway just as Sasha emerged from her room, flashlight in hand. Danny was already there, standing in front of the kitchen wall that now had a narrow, warped doorframe in it, one that hadn't been there yesterday. The wood looked older than the rest of the cabin, unpainted, water damaged, and in the center, a doorknob crusted with something that looked like rust but smelled like meat left out too long. We didn't open it. We stood there, all four of us, barely breathing, as the knocking came once more. 3 soft taps, patient and deliberate. Then silence. That's when we realized what the notes had been trying to tell us all along. If it knocks, don't answer, even if it knows your name. These weren't clever props or creepy Airbnb gimmicks. They were warnings. Real ones, and we'd already let it in too far. Sasha was the first to say it. "We're not alone here," she whispered, and I don't think we ever were. This place, it watches, it shifts, it wants us to notice it, to pay attention. That's how it gets close. Danny nodded slowly. It's like a game. It hides until you see it. Then it starts talking. Then it knocks. And if you answer, maybe that's when it takes you. We all looked at each other, the full weight of the realization settling in. We'd crossed the line days ago. The recorders, the hike, the cellar, the mirror. Every one of those moments had been a breadcrumb, leading us further into something we didn't understand. And now, it was standing outside our walls, asking to be let in. We slept in shifts that night, or tried to. We barricaded the new door with a bookshelf and shoved the kitchen table against it. Cam kept watch first, sitting in the corner with a camping hatchet across his lap, but I don't think it made either of us feel any safer. The cabin had stopped pretending to be a cabin. Now, it was just something holding us, and we couldn't tell how long it would be before it got bored. Around 4 a.m., I dozed off for maybe 20 minutes. When I opened my eyes, the kitchen wall was blank again. The door was gone, so was the table and the bookshelf. I scrambled up, heart pounding, and called out for the others. Cam was still in his spot frozen, eyes wide open, staring at the empty wall. I didn't hear them move it, he said flatly. I never heard a sound. The table was back where we'd originally found it. The bookshelf too. Everything perfectly placed, like someone had reset the cabin overnight, erasing any proof of what had happened. We didn't speak about it after that. There was no point. Words felt cheap. They didn't match what was happening. And besides, whatever lived here, whatever intelligence was behind the place, it wanted us to talk about it, to share what we'd seen, maybe even to name it. And we weren't going to give it that power. But deep down, I knew we were already too late. We woke to the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke. Not the comfortable, slow-burning kind that clings to your clothes after a campfire. This was sharp, bitter, chemical like burnt plastic, and something underneath it, something living. Cam was already by the door, flashlight in one hand, hatchet in the other. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, and his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Sasha stood behind him, holding one of the recorders like a weapon, though she hadn't hit play. Danny was at the window, peeking through the curtain in short, nervous bursts. The forest outside wasn't normal anymore. The trees had shifted. Again, their trunks bent at impossible angles, as if the entire clearing had tilted sideways and the trees hadn't caught up. The wind chime was gone. In its place was a small burlap doll, nailed to the post. It was wet from the morning dew, but still seemed to stare straight at us with eyes made from buttons. I swear I recognized. One was from Danny's coat. The other looked like it came off Cam's backpack. We were done pretending. No one packed their bags. No one said, "Let's go." We just started moving. The cabin didn't stop us at first. It let us leave. Let us believe we were escaping. The path back to the road was still there, or looked like it. We moved fast, pushing through brambles that hadn't been there on the hike in. Every 20 feet, we had to stop and reorient, because the trees kept getting denser, thicker, there. Branches tangling over the trail as if trying to net us in. About half a mile out, Sasha stopped. Her breathing turned ragged, eyes wide. "Do you smell that?" she asked. I did. That smoke again. Stronger now, closer. We turned a corner and froze. The path ended in a clearing we'd never seen before, and at the center was a second cabin, identical to the one we'd just left. Same porch, same broken rocking chair, same warped roofline and carved symbols over the doorframe, symbols we hadn't noticed before, but now seemed burned into our memories. "Nope," Cam whispered and turned us around. But when we backtracked, the trail behind us was gone, just trees, thick and dark and silent. I pulled out my compass, an old analog one I kept on my hiking pack for emergencies. It spun in slow, lazy circles. Completely useless. The forest had turned into a maze, and it was closing. We ran. No more whispering. No more quiet footsteps. Just full-on panic, boots thudding against the wet earth, lungs burning as we pushed through brush and low-hanging limbs. Cam tripped once and scraped his leg. I saw the blood soaking through his jeans as he got up. didn't matter. We had to keep moving. Behind us, something was following. Not footsteps, not rustling, just a shift, a pressure. Like space itself was collapsing in our wake. We couldn't hear it, but we could feel it. Like an idea you can't unthink. A presence growing stronger the more afraid we became. We stumbled into a second clearing, this one smaller, ringed with those same sharp stones from before. At the center was a hole, circular, 5 feet across, perfectly clean. Not a sinkhole, not erosion. A door, no ladder. No bottom in sight. Just darkness that seemed deeper than it should have been. Sasha said, "I dreamed this." Her voice was flat, resigned. We go in or it gets us out here. No one argued. That's the worst part. No one even hesitated that we lowered ourselves in, one by one, gripping the edges and dropping into the black. It wasn't as deep as it looked. We landed in a tunnel carved into dirt walls, reinforced with beams like an old mine or storm shelter. We didn't have flashlights anymore. Just one lantern Cam had grabbed from the cabin, which flickered constantly, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to stay alive. We walked in silence. Every few steps, the tunnel forked. Each time, we picked the left path. No plan, just instinct or something like it. The deeper we went, the louder the sound became. Not footsteps, not voices, breathing that not our own. Something massive and wet and steady, like lungs the size of a room. Then the knocking returned. This time, it wasn't gentle. It shook the dirt, made pebbles fall from the ceiling. It came in threes, always threes, left wall, then right, then behind us. It was circling, hurting. We ran again, and this time, I swear the tunnel shifted behind us, closing the routes we didn't take, reshaping itself to keep us moving forward. I stopped thinking, stopped planning. I just followed the others until the tunnel opened into a chamber with walls covered in old recordings tapes, SD cards, hard drives, even reels, all labeled in messy handwriting, names, dates, places. Some crossed out. Some written over. In the center, on a pedestal, sat a recorder. Just like ours. It was still recording. We didn't speak. I stepped forward and pressed stop. The breathing stopped too. The tunnel behind us was gone. In its place was a ladder leading up into light. We climbed. When we emerged, we weren't at the cabin. We were on the road, just outside the car. It was clean, dry, like we'd never left. My compass worked again. My phone had service, and the forest behind us looked normal. Birds chirping, leaves rustling, as if nothing had happened, as if it had let us go, but we all knew the truth. It didn't let us go. It marked us. And it's still listening. We didn't talk during the drive home. Not once. The usual post-trip banter jokes about who snored the loudest, who ate the last protein bar, what score we'd give the cabin this year. None of it happened. We sat in silence, the road unspooling in front of us, everyone staring out there. Own window, like we were each trying to unsee what we had seen. Every now and then, someone would shift, crack their knuckles, or cough just to break the tension. But no one said what we were all thinking. We weren't the same people who had driven out 3 days earlier. Something had changed us in ways we didn't have words for yet. Cam dropped me off first. He barely made eye contact, just nodded as I stepped out of the car and muttered, "Take care, man." I said the same. Neither of us smiled. As I stood on the curb, watching the Subaru disappear around the corner, I felt this deep, sinking pressure in my chest, like I'd just escaped something terrible, but left a piece of myself behind. The wind felt heavier than it should, the air too still. I told myself it was just stress, a mental echo. But that night, when I turned on my recorder to erase the files from the trip, I found a new one, a track I hadn't made, time-stamped 2 hours after we'd supposedly escaped. I hit play, hoping it was just a glitch. What I heard chilled me, was the sound of the cabin door creaking open. Slow, deliberate, then footsteps bare, wet feet slapping against old wood. Then a whisper, my name, not shouted, not whispered in fear, just spoken like a statement of fact. He left. But not. All of him. Then silence. Then laughter, not human, but not fully inhuman either. Something that had learned the shape of laughter, but not the meaning behind it. I deleted the file. 2 days later, Cam texted me, "Have you had dreams?" That was all he said. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? Yes, I've been dreaming of tunnels, of mirrors that don't show reflections, of a door that knocks from both sides at once, of a cabin with no address that somehow keeps finding mine. I've woken up twice now with dirt under my fingernails and the faint smell of smoke in my hair. Once, I found a pine needle in my mouth. I live in a high-rise apartment in the middle of the city. There are no pine trees for miles. Sasha called me late at night the following week. Her voice was shaky, like she hadn't slept in days. I think something followed me home, she said. I found a wind chime hanging outside my bedroom window. I don't know who put it there. It's made of teeth. I wanted to tell her it wasn't real, that maybe someone was playing a prank. But I didn't, because the next morning I found one too, hanging from my bathroom doorknob. Mine wasn't made of teeth, it was made of buttons. And I recognized every single one. Danny hasn't said a word. His social media went dark. No texts, no calls. Cam drove out to check on him last week. Said his apartment was completely empty. No sign of a struggle. Just ... gone. His phone sat on the kitchen table, still plugged in. Cam said he picked it up and it opened straight to a voice memo titled, "I stayed. None of us have dared to go back to the site. We tried reporting the listing, but the Red Hollow site is gone. No trace of it anywhere online. I even pulled the booking confirmation from my email history. Nothing. Vanished. Not even in my trash folder. Like the cabin never existed. Except we know it did. It knows we know. That's the problem. It didn't want to be found, and now we've touched it, fed it, gave it names to remember. Last night, I found something new. Tucked in the back of my closet was an old shoebox I didn't recognize. Inside was a stack of Polaroid photos. Each one showed the cabin from a different angle, as if someone had been circling it slowly. The last one was of me, standing in front of the door, hand on the knob. I don't remember the photo being taken. I don't remember opening that door. But in the picture, I'm smiling, like I've been waiting. There was a note folded inside the box. Just one sentence, written in the same scratchy script we saw on the recorder labels in the underground tunnel. It read, "Your key works in any door now." I haven't slept since I read it. Every night since, something has knocked on the wall behind my bed. Not the door, the wall. Just 3 soft, patient knocks. 1, 2, 3. And then, a long pause. Like it's giving me time to decide. I haven't answered yet. I don't plan to. But I know one day soon, I might. And when I do, I'm afraid I'll hear my own voice on the other side. I should have known better than to say yes to the estate lawyer. The signs were all their cryptic emails, sudden silence from my aunt, and then the voicemail that ended in a knock. I hadn't spoken to her in a few years, not after she started that true crime blog and turned her life into one long paranoid spiral. But when the lawyer called to say she'd left everything to me, her house, her archives, and full rights to her audio recordings, I felt like I couldn't just ignore it. I'd admired her once when I was younger. She was brave in ways I never could be. So when they handed me the keys and a dusty thumb drive marked 333, I thought maybe I'd spend a few weeks sorting through her stuff, maybe posthumously organize her work as a final tribute. If only I had listened to my gut. The house was smaller than I remembered, tucked on a narrow lot between 2 overgrown oaks on a dead-end road in Oregon. The windows were covered in blackout curtains from the inside. A satellite dish the size of a car door pointed directly at the sky from the backyard like it was listening for something no one else could hear. I unlocked the door and was immediately hit with that smell: old carpet, burnt coffee, and something fainter underneath, like rust. It didn't feel like a home anymore. More like a bunker someone forgot to finish building. Still, I unpacked, set up a cot in the corner, and told myself I'd only stay a week. Just long enough to go through her files, sort the boxes, and figure out what was worth saving. Her office was the worst. Floor-to-ceiling corkboards lined with red thread, and index cards, all covered in names, dates, audio file names, and scribbled timestamps. Post-it notes stuck directly to the monitors. One read, "Don't play before 3:30 a.m." Another, in bold Sharpie, "Never play 0533 AIF out loud." A desk calendar still showed the week she disappeared, every day marked with 3:33 in increasingly frantic handwriting. I should have turned around right then. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I plugged in the drive. Because even though I was scared, I was also curious. Maybe even more than curious. I wanted to know what she'd been hearing. The drive held exactly 33 audio files, each one named for a date, ending in either live, echo, or knock. I clicked on one at random _sept_0422_knock.wav and hit play. It started with soft room tone, just the hiss of an open mic in a quiet house. Then a creak. Then the sound of footsteps crossing wood, and then 3 sharp knocks. I nearly dropped my headphones. They were right in my ears, so loud it felt like someone was knocking on my skull. I paused the track, waited, laughed a little at myself. It was just sound. I deal with this kind of editing every day. I've cut out worse. But something about the rhythm of the knocks stayed with me. Like they weren't just random. Like they meant something. I stayed up all night, going through her notebooks. One phrase showed up again and again. "He comes at 3:33. She'd written about him as if he were real. Not a hallucination, not a symbol, a man, no face. Always knocking. And the knock always exactly 3 seconds apart. I checked the metadata on the recordings. Most were between 3:31 and 3:35 a.m., with file creation times marked by the second. All exactly when she said he arrived. I started thinking this was some sort of performance piece. like she'd crafted a long narrative around a made-up intruder. That idea made me feel better. It gave me control. So I hit play on another file. This one had her voice in it. Calm, tired. "I've been hearing him every night," she whispered into the mic. "It starts the same. First, the door creaks. Then the floorboards shift. Then ... the knock. Always. The knock. 3, 3, 3. She paused. You could hear her breath. If I respond, he gets closer. That was it. End of file. Just 10 seconds of audio and silence. It felt like bait. I checked the door locks again. They were still latched. But now I noticed something I hadn't before: scratches on the fenton. Inside of the front door, like fingernails. And right next to them, faint and shaky, someone had carved 333 into the wood. Looking back though, I should have left that night. But I told myself it was grief. That maybe she'd done it to herself, spiraling into paranoia in a house with no sunlight and too many conspiracy boards. But I'd only been in that house for a day, and already I had started checking the time. Every hour, not because I was bored, because I didn't want to see that one time on the clock. I didn't want it to be 3:33, and most of all, I didn't want to hear what came with it. I'll skip the boring stuff, the endless boxes of receipts, backup drives with mundane file names, and the stacks of newspaper clippings about cases I barely remembered. Most of her house felt like it was trying to cover something up, like it had been scrubbed down but not cleaned. Dust lingered in all the corners, sure, but there were areas where the dust was disturbed, like something had been moved recently, but nothing was there anymore. I started cataloging the files on her desktop computer, which miraculously still worked. She had folders for every year dating back to 2015, each marked with cryptic notes like Whisper Sessions, Shed Log, and Glass Visitor. But what caught my eye were the voice memos. Dozens of them, each titled with the same date stamp style, ending in self. These weren't blog posts. They were raw, personal. She talked about the knocks in them, but not like an investigator, like a survivor. She'd begun charting their frequency, measuring the gap between each knock down to the millisecond. "They're too exact," she said in one memo. "Nothing in nature moves that precisely." Another time, she said, "It's not the sound that scares me anymore. It's the pause after." I couldn't stop listening. It was like being let into the mind of someone circling the drain, each recording a little more frantic than the last. By the end, she was begging anyone who found the files not to follow the trail. "Do not look for him," she whispered. "He finds you when you know." Later that day, I found the attic key in the kitchen drawer. I hadn't planned to go up there. It had always freaked me out, even as a kid, but something kept pulling at me. When I finally climbed the creaky ladder and opened the hatch, the first thing I noticed was the cold 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house. The second thing was the tape recorder. It sat in the middle of the attic floor, covered in a light layer of dust, but the cassette inside looked newer, like it had been switched out recently. I pressed play. Static. Then her voice. "Test 47. Leaving this here in case he follows me up." Then silence. A pause. Then, like clockwork, the knock. 3 slow raps. And then the sound of her screaming. I backed away so fast I nearly fell off the ladder. My hands were shaking. I could still hear the sound of her voice ringing in my ears long after I shut the hatch. That was when it hit me. There were no cassette players in the house except that one. And that tape hadn't been listed in any of her cataloged recordings, which meant she never logged it. Which meant ... she didn't want it found. I started checking the timestamps of the other files. That attic tape? It had been recorded 2 weeks before she disappeared. I went back to the office and started searching the closet for any other hidden items. That's when I found the cardboard box. It wasn't labeled, just shoved behind a stack of shoeboxes. Inside were burned CDs, hundreds of them, labeled in black marker, "Unknown Voices." I put one in an old external drive and played it. No music. Just ambient room sound. Then whispers, dozens of them, talking over each other in a language I couldn't understand. But one thing kept coming through. The name, Jenna. I froze. That was my name. I hadn't been in any of these recordings. So how the hell was I hearing my name in something recorded over a year ago? The phone rang then. I hadn't even realized there was a landline connected, but the shrill tone of it cut through the room like a knife. I answered on instinct. No one spoke. Just soft breathing on the other end. I hung up. It rang again 30 seconds later. Same thing. The third time, I let it go to voicemail. The message that played made my stomach turn. It was her voice. He knows you're here now. Then a knock, and another, and another. The recording ended in static. If only I had listened to her earlier. If I'd taken the hint seriously, really understood what she was trying to leave behind, I would have known to stop. But I kept going, because by then, it wasn't about honoring her memory. It was about figuring out what she'd found. What had scared her enough to barricade her doors and document every knock. And more than that, I needed to know if she was still alive. That night, I put in earplugs. I didn't want to hear the knock. I didn't want to know if it came. But at 3:33 a.m., I woke up anyway. Even through the phone plugs, I heard it. 3 knocks, then silence dot, and then a voice dot. It was her, whispering from the other side of the door. Don't answer. I told myself it could have been a dream. I told myself the house was old, that pipes creak, that wind knocks things loose. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard. I hadn't imagined her voice outside my door at 3:33 in the morning. I hadn't imagined the way she whispered not to answer. And I sure as hell didn't imagine the final sound on that voicemail, the sharp crack of something snapping, like wood splitting under pressure. That sound hadn't come from the phone. It had come from inside the house, a full second after. The message ended. I stayed in bed, frozen, every muscle locked tight, too afraid to even turn over and face the bedroom door. When morning came, I tried to convince myself I'd just been overly tired. I hadn't been sleeping much since arriving. The stress, the recordings, the weird sounds, it all added up to frayed nerves. But then I stepped into the hallway and noticed the faint muddy footprints on the hardwood floor. They were bare, longer than mine, and led from the front door to my bedroom, then stopped. No return prints. No smears or drags. Just clean, dark outlines pressed into the wood grain like something had walked in and never left. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about my aunt's obsession anymore. It was becoming mine too. The house was reacting to me now. I went back to her recordings, scanning through timestamps and audio cues. One entry from a week before her disappearance stood out. She described waking up to her stereo playing an old jazz record she didn't own. At first, she thought it was a neighbor or interference, but when she checked the turntable, the record had no label. Just a red sticker with 3:33 scrawled in marker. That night, I dreamed of the same song she described, smooth, crackling, off-tempo, and I woke to find the Bluetooth speaker on the nightstand blinking. It had turned itself on. No device connected. Just static hissing from its core. Later, that afternoon, I went through the attic again. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe something obvious I'd missed. Maybe some clue to help explain the messages, but instead, I found a second recorder. This one was newer, still in the package with a sticky note attached. Use only if I don't come back. There was no signature. Just the same scratchy writing I'd seen all over her corkboards. I opened it, installed fresh batteries, and kept it with me for the rest of the day. Around 3 p.m., I set it on the hallway table while I went to make tea. When I came back 10 minutes later, it had stopped recording. When I played it back, I heard my own footsteps walking away, and then a second set following 2 beats behind. right behind me. By the time dusk fell, I couldn't ignore the shift in the house. The air felt heavier, like pressure was building just beneath the floorboards. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, not with sound, but with rhythm, as if the entire structure was waiting for something. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat up in the living room with every lamp on and the tape recorder set to record. At 3:31 a.m., the temperature dropped. At 3:32, the lights flickered. And at exactly 3:33, there were 3 slow knocks on the front door. Then silence. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The knocks didn't repeat, but a minute later, the power went out completely. No thunder, no wind, just a flick in darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself to stay put. I wasn't going to open that door, but something new happened. The recorder turned itself off. I checked it twice. The batteries were fine, but the screen blinked and shut down on its own. When I turned it back on in the morning, the file had been wiped. No audio, just an empty folder with a new title, Scene. I should have known better. I should have packed up and left right then. But the thing is, by this point, I wasn't afraid the house was haunted. I was afraid leaving wouldn't matter. That whatever had started here didn't stay trapped in the wood or wires. That it followed people, like my aunt, like me. I kept thinking about that name I heard on the CD, my name, whispered in the past. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was like the house had expected me. That night, I dreamed I was standing at the door, hand on the knob, as something knocked softly on the other side. I didn't open it, but when I turned away in the dream, I saw a mirror leaning against the hallway wall. My reflection wasn't facing me. It was looking at the door and smiling. I should have known better than to treat this like a puzzle. But that's what I did next. I tried to organize it all. I took over her office completely, spreading out every printout, scribbled note, USB, and CD I could find. I started building my own timeline of events, cross-referencing her logs with the dates of her recordings. The knock always came between 3:30 and 3:35 a.m., never once earlier, never once later. But more than that, I started to see a pattern in what happened afterward: files going missing, devices failing, blackouts, or complete memory gaps lasting hours. She had marked those days in red ink on a printed calendar, and when I laid out the last year of her life, it became clear. The nights the knocks came more than once, something always followed. And she always got closer to the edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a haunting. It felt structured, like a ritual that someone or something had been running. I started digging through her browser history and found she'd visited dozens of forums on paranormal time events and 333 phenomena. But one entry in particular stood out. A now archived thread titled "The Third Minute. Do not let him knock twice." Inside, anonymous users shared experiences eerily similar to hers. One said they moved apartments 3 times in a year, but the knock kept finding them. Another claimed they stopped using clocks altogether to avoid triggering it, but still, the knocks came. And one user, simply named Echo3, wrote only, "Don't record him. It lets him in." I remembered the notebook I'd found earlier that week, her personal journal. I hadn't wanted to read it out of respect, but now it felt like the only honest thing she left behind. Her handwriting started neat but became more jagged with each entry. She spoke of a man with no face, dressed in black, who never spoke but always knocked. And after the third knock, she said she could feel him watching, not through windows or cracks in doors, but from the gaps in memory. "He lives in the skipped second," she wrote. "The one your brain forgets. That's where he waits." The last few pages were almost unreadable, with shaky drawings of a clock missing its hour hand and her name written over and over in slanted red ink. I couldn't shake one phrase she kept repeating. "He knocked for my sister too." My mom. That detail gutted me. My mother had died in a car crash 5 years ago. No warning, no explanation, just a sudden skid off the road in the middle of a dry afternoon. The police ruled it driver error, but if what my aunt wrote was true, the knock had started with her. Maybe my aunt didn't become obsessed, maybe. She inherited something. Something I hadn't wanted to believe could reach past the grave. I called my dad that night just to ask if he remembered anything weird happening before the accident. There was a long pause, and then he said she used to wake up crying, said someone was tapping on her window. I always thought it was a bird. Why? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew what it meant. Whatever this was, it didn't start with me. And if that's true, then it wasn't going to end with me either. My aunt had fought it for years, had tried to capture it, label it, slow it down, but in the end, it got her. And if it followed bloodlines, then it was mine now. That night, I played one of her last recordings again, the one where she said not to respond. I closed my eyes, listened closely, and caught something I hadn't before. A second voice, barely audible beneath hers. A male whisper, not speaking English, just humming a single broken note. Like a lullaby missing half its tune. I couldn't help myself. I isolated the background frequencies on my laptop, filtering out the voice, slowing it down. It formed a pattern. 3 tones, one long, one short, one held. It sounded like a code. Morse? A warning? A call? I didn't know. But I felt it deep. In my chest, the way you feel thunder before hearing it. I wrote down the pattern, repeated it to myself like a mantra. I even hummed it without realizing I was doing it, until my reflection did it back. It happened in the bathroom. I was brushing my teeth, staring at the fogged-up mirror. The tune slipped from me, 3 low hums, and in the reflection, my mouth didn't move. But the sound echoed anyway. Just once, I stumbled back, dropped the toothbrush, slammed the door. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't record anything. I just sat in the kitchen with every light on, watching the minute hand on my analog watch tick closer to 3:33. When it did, there was no knock. Just a whisper from the hallway, not a word. Just my name, drawn out like it had been pulled through broken glass. Jenna-ia. I realized that this wasn't about the knock. The knock was the warning, the invitation. It's what came next that mattered, the thing that waits behind the sound. My aunt hadn't just left me her things, she left me the door. And I was starting to hear the key turning dot by the end of that week. I stopped trying to pretend anything was normal. The knocks didn't come every night anymore, but the silence that replaced them was worse, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to break. I caught myself humming that strange 3-part tone more often, not even realizing I was doing it until my throat hurt. I avoided mirrors entirely. I hadn't slept a full night in days, and the only reason I ate was because I was terrified I'd lose time if I didn't keep track of meals. One night, I woke up sitting at my desk with my aunt's voice memos open. I hadn't touched the files in hours, but there they were playing on repeat. My mouse moved by itself. The log showed someone or something had opened the files just past 3:33 a.m. I started finding physical evidence too. It wasn't just sound anymore. The hallway light bulbs kept burning out, only the hallway, never the kitchen or bedroom. A dark smear appeared on the wall behind the coat rack, something sticky and tar-like that no cleaning agent could fully remove. I finally called an electrician, thinking maybe it was some old wire issue causing everything to flicker. He showed up on a Friday afternoon, looked around for 30 minutes, and then asked if anyone else had been messing with the breaker box. I said no. He looked at me for a long time before replying, "Someone rewired this place to cut power to certain areas on a timer. Every day at the same time." I asked him when the shutdown occurred. He checked his notepad and said, "Looks like 3:33 a.m. on the dot." The next night, something knocked from inside the bedroom wall. It wasn't the same pattern. It was fast, angry. I backed out of the room, closed the door, and didn't open it again until sunrise. When I finally gathered the courage to check, the wall behind the headboard had changed. Faint impressions like handprints had formed in the paint, each spaced apart by about 10 inches, forming a triangle. My stomach turned when I remembered something my aunt had written. 3 knocks, 3 prints, 3 faces. That last part didn't make sense to me at first. Not until I saw the old photos hanging in the hallway. One of them, a framed image of me and her when I was 12, had been turned around. On the back, someone had drawn a face with red marker, 2 dots and a long, jagged smile. I checked the basement again. I hadn't gone down there since. I arrived, mostly because it creeped me out even when I was younger. But now, something kept drawing me there. The door had always stuck, but that night it opened too easily, as if it had been waiting. The basement wasn't large, just concrete floors, an old workbench, and shelves filled with mildew-damaged boxes. But tucked behind the water heater was a locked cabinet I'd never seen before. It took me 20 minutes to break it open. Inside were half a dozen VHS tapes and a cracked handheld camcorder. I took them upstairs and plugged the camcorder into my laptop using a cheap adapter. The first tape was dated exactly a year before my aunt vanished. What I saw made my blood run cold. The footage was grainy, recorded in her living room. She was speaking directly into the camera, documenting what she called Phase 3. She spoke slowly, carefully, like each word might invite something closer. It's not just sound. She said, it's a presence. It finds you in places where silence should live. And once it knows your name, it doesn't need to knock anymore. She paused, clearly terrified, and then added, tonight, I'm going to try talking to it. The footage ended abruptly with static, followed by a loud snap, the exact sound I'd heard at the end of her voicemail. The rest of the tapes were worse. Short clips of her sleeping filmed from across the room. But she lived alone. Another showed her kitchen light flicking on by itself while a shadow darted across the wall just outside the frame. There was no clear shape to it, only that it was tall, wrong, and too quiet. I played every single tape, and after each one, I noticed a change in the house doors left ajar that I'd locked. Objects shifting location, a growing hum in the floorboards at night. Then came the message burned into the inside of the fridge. Talk to him. I almost did. That night, I sat at the dining room table with a digital recorder, a flashlight, and the camcorder pointing directly at me. I waited until 3:33. The knock came 3 sharp hits against the inside of the kitchen cabinet. I steadied my breathing and whispered, "Who are you?" There was no answer. I asked again. Nothing. Just when I was about to give up, the flashlight blinked 3 times. And I heard something moving in the walls, crawling, dragging, closer. I turned the camera off. I couldn't do it. I wasn't ready. I ran to my car, sat there until morning, and didn't look at the house once. But when I finally returned, the door was wide open. On the hallway floor was a piece of paper, torn. From her notebook, written in her handwriting were 5 words. He comes when you doubt. I couldn't keep living like that. The fear was eating through my skin, my sleep, my sanity. Every corner of the house pulsed with a sense of something watching, something that didn't need eyes to see me. I was afraid to think too loudly, like my own thoughts might summon him. I stopped recording at night. I taped over the red LED lights on every device. But it didn't help. He didn't need the gear. He just needed me to listen, and I already had. That was my mistake. I remembered what my aunt had written. Once you hear him, he's heard you too. So I started researching how to stop it, not delay it, not avoid it. I needed to end it. Her files hinted at a few things. She'd contacted an archivist who worked in folklore preservation, someone named Marcus Daly, whose emails were buried in a folder marked Silence Cult. I tracked him down online, though most of his sites had been taken offline. I found an old message board post from 2016 where he warned people not to play the silence backward. I had no idea what that meant until I checked my aunt's audio library. One file was different. It was just static. No file name, no date. Out of desperation, I reversed the waveform in my editing software. The result chilled me. A voice, male, slow, speaking directly into the mic. "You've already let me in." That night, I left the house, drove 3 towns over, rented a motel room, didn't tell anyone where I was going. I left my phone in a drawer and paid in cash. But at 3:33, the TV flickered on by itself. No signal, just a black screen. Then, faintly, my name in white text flickered for half a second in the bottom right corner. Just one word, Jenna. I unplugged the TV, sat in the bathroom until sunrise. When I went back to the bedroom, my duffel bag was open, and on top of my clothes was the cassette recorder from the attic. It was clear then I couldn't run. This thing wasn't tied to the house, it was tied to me. So I went back, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I pored over her journals for anything resembling a ritual, a ward, something useful. Finally, I found it half-burnt pages in the fireplace ashes. She'd tried to destroy them, but most of the ink was still visible. A hand-drawn circle with notes like iron filings, mirror facing west, and record, then erase. I recreated it exactly in the center of her office using the old cassette tape. I sat in the circle, placed the mirror as instructed, and hit record. What followed was the longest 5 minutes of my life. I said nothing, just listened, and the silence stretched out like a rubber band ready to snap. Then, just as the timer hit 3:33, I saw the mirror ripple, not physically, but like light itself had bent. And in the reflection, I saw something. Standing behind me, tall, featureless, like it was made of the darkness between things. It didn't move, didn't knock, just stood there while the recorder ran. I reached out and pressed stop. The moment I did, the figure vanished. The air in the room shifted, and for the first time in days, the house felt still. I knew better than to feel relief. I immediately pressed record again, and this time, without waiting, I pressed rewind. Then hit record a second time to erase what had just been captured. As I watched the tape spin, I felt the pressure building again. A low sound, like wind in a tunnel, began to stir. Then, a pop like air being sucked out. The light surged, flickered, then stabilized. I burned the cassette in the fireplace, following her notes to the letter. And for one full night, nothing happened. The next day, I checked every corner of the house. No knocks, no messages. The fridge was clean. The footprints gone. Even the air felt lighter, like the weight had finally lifted. I played white noise through every speaker in the house just to be sure, and not a single distortion showed up. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. I stayed up till 4 a.m. that night. Nothing. I didn't sleep, but I sat in the silence and let myself believe she had been right, that her ritual had worked, that I'd followed the rules, that it was gone. But as I stepped out into the front yard at dawn, something cold brushed the back of my neck. I turned, expecting a breeze, but there was none. Instead, on the front door, in faint chalk white lettering, was a phrase I hadn't seen before: "One more knock." I left the house the next day. I didn't pack much, just the bare essentials and my aunt's old notebook. I told myself I was done, that whatever had happened, there was finished. But deep down, I knew I wasn't free. The ritual hadn't ended. Anything, it had paused it, redirected it, or worse, acknowledged it. That chalk white message, "One more knock," it stayed with me, burned behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I moved into a small apartment 2 towns over, nothing fancy. No mirrors, No electronics I didn't need. And for a while, it was quiet. No knocks, no voices, just silence. But I couldn't trust it. I knew the way this thing worked. It waited. It let you forget, then reminded you exactly how much it remembered. A month later, the first package arrived. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in red ink on the top of a small padded envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a single Polaroid photo. The photo was of me standing in the living room of my aunt's house, staring directly at the camera. The problem? I had no memory of that photo being taken. I flipped it over, and scrawled on the back was 3 hours 33 minutes and 23 seconds. I didn't want to plug in the drive. I knew better. But eventually, my curiosity cracked the door open just like always. The file was audio, and it was me. My voice, whispering something I couldn't quite understand, the words twisted and slow, like they were being played underwater. And beneath that, just barely there, the same 3 knocks. The next day, the hallway light outside my apartment burned out. Then my microwave clock reset. Then my neighbor, who I barely knew, stopped me outside to ask if I'd been singing that weird tune in the middle of the night. I hadn't. I swear I hadn't. But somehow she'd heard it. The low hum, the broken melody, 3 parts. I tried sleeping during the day, staying awake all night, but it didn't help. The knocks didn't need walls. They didn't need doors. They came from inside the mind, timed perfectly. Every time I closed my eyes, I contacted a paranormal group out of desperation. Told them I was doing research for a documentary. I didn't tell them it was personal. They said they'd heard rumors about the third minute, but dismissed it as digital folklore. One of them, a tech named Ray, agreed to analyze the old recordings. I sent him the isolated knock pattern. 2 days later, he called me, terrified. He said the knocks created a signal 3 bursts in a sub-audible frequency, something that mimicked neural pulse responses. It's not knocking, he told me. It's syncing. I asked, syncing with what? His voice cracked when he said, your brain. I never heard from him again. I've since tried to delete every file, every copy, every note. I burned the notebook. I wiped the drives, but none of it mattered. I still hear it. Not every night, not even every week, but just often enough to know it's still there, waiting, testing the silence. A few weeks ago, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. No words. Just a timestamp, 3:33. That same night, my bathroom mirror cracked from the inside, tiny lines fanning out from the center like something had pressed against it from behind. Looking back though, I think it was never about stopping him. It was about containing him. That's what my aunt tried to do. Not end it, just slow it down. Pass it along, like a curse with an expiration. And I think I've reached mine. Last night, I woke up at 3:33 exactly. Not to a knock, not to a voice, but to my reflection moving a full second out of sync with me. It smiled before I did, tilted its head before I even thought to move. And then it mouthed something, 3 words, let me in. I've stopped sleeping entirely now. I don't trust the dark. I don't trust silence. I've moved 5 times in the last year, and yet somehow, I keep finding things I didn't bring, photos with faces scratched out, clocks stuck at 3:33, whispers on voicemail messages I never recorded. I even met someone online last month who claimed to have gone through something similar. She said her mother used to hum the tune. I asked her to send me a voice memo. She did. It started normally, then her voice cracked, shifted, and she whispered. My name, not Jenna. My full name. A name I haven't used online. A name I haven't spoken aloud in years. So if you're reading this, if you're watching anything with this name, this story, this knock stop, don't replay it. Don't record it. Don't hum it. Because that's how he finds you. Through the seconds we skip, the silences we ignore, the names we whisper back, And if you ever wake at 3:33, don't open the door.